Shavi, you're there?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, you can share the after movie now and afterwards the speaker's video.
Okay, ma'am.
We have more than 80,000 participants attending this event from more than 90 countries. Can we use gross national happiness instead of GDP in least developed countries, as it includes ethical values and good governance? The question is in reference to the rampant increase in corruption in some LDC and developing countries like India, Brazil, and Bangladesh.
Yeah, GDP definitely is not the measure of happiness.
All at J.M. Smith that we were supposed to be a good supplier to our customers, be a good customer to our suppliers, be a good employer to our employees, be a good citizen of our community. This conference and in everything that the Jan Center and its associates are doing.
Your knowledge is your wealth. Your intelligence is your wealth. Your personality is your wealth. That is your dollar. I started with $1 in my pocket, school dropout, 8th standard, but I am here in front of you with 1 lakh students, with campuses across the country, 1 million students. And before I started in education, I already created 3,500 entrepreneurs.
Leading from behind is also the best position to develop future leaders. From here, one can see who is most effective at handling obstacles and also influencing the rest of the team for better and worse. While building a compelling case for gender diversity, advancing women leadership in the workplace should consider all these dimensions. It is indeed an honor and a privilege to be invited at the International Research Summit AVLOKAN. The literal meaning of AVLOKAN is the art of self-realization.
If you complete this cycle, it becomes a very sustainable model, wherein there is no shortage of resources for conducting further research if you make it applied. And I must reiterate that I do not undermine the importance of fundamental research or purely academic research. This needs to be kept in mind as far as research as an activity is concerned for academic institutions. Now, being such a patient students, particularly you all, I don't have enough words to thank you for what you have put out. I think all attention of the university is keeping you all in mind, and you will be the ultimate beneficiary of whatever you are trying to do.
One thing is to redesign the banking system so that they are devoted to do the work, the whole bank, not just tiny window in the conventional banks.
The bank in Bangalore is doing very well, bank for the poor, and is doing very well in
Thank you. Thank you. I'm glad to hear that.
It's at 6,000 crore level they have reached, Grameen. It's all your Professor Mohammed Yunis. and they have been
Thank you
effectively
so
doing it for the poor, and poor is becoming better and better. Even if a vegetable
Thank-
vendor is there, he's able to earn 5 lakh rupees a year and pay his fees for his children. So your philosophy is working
Wonderful.
across the world.
Thank you so much. I'm glad to hear that.
So the next decade is about 7Ds. Disease is not going away so easily. So I cannot predict what will happen, but yes, I do see it is causing the digital divide between rich and poor. But at the same time, you see, with respect to my previous answer as well, that these technologies are making field level for every.
Skills and network. So skills plus network is success. Only success in networking is not in finding the right person, but in becoming the right person. True value of networking lies in helping others. Now,
regarding introverts and the connect with networking, I just wanted to say that a lot of people who are actually introverts and they feel hesitant regarding networking. They feel like that it is not for me. But I think your talk has definitely motivated them, and I think now they can go ahead with it.
Our weaknesses represent our greatest opportunities for development. Plant many seeds, and not all of them actually grow up to be a fully nurtured plant. Some of them do, right? So you expose them to many things, and you take a step back and you start seeing where they're flourishing and kind of build a theme around it, right? There's a theme around like a pool of talents which are around that theme. Start identifying and observing that theme. And as parent and as role models, just nurture, just provide the nurturing, giving them that opportunities, and they will thrive. They'll just do what best they can do.
For all the people who are yet to start their corporate jobs, who are yet to start their entrepreneurship journey, my dear friend, this is going to happen with you also. Unless and until you understand that the funnel that needs to be inverted. Okay, so in today's dynamic market, in today's global market, it all begins with networking and building the relationship.
So the bad comes with the good, as I pointed out in so many of the examples.
How do we differentiate ethical, moral, and legal behaviors in our course of achieving our life goals? Don't the three behaviors overlap and create confusion in the process of achieving our goals of life?
The severity of the bad, number one, and ease of implementation, the other thing. Now,
I want to share the idea that this is the way we respect other people. We don't do it by holding their hands in an age of COVID. We do it by the Asian way, actually, of acknowledging their presence and their importance and their dignity. So I thank all of you for sharing your thoughts.
What light means to the darkness, that is what Dr. Kotler means to the marketer in me.
Dr. Philip Kotler, to me, is the inventor, creator, and preserver of contemporary marketing.
For me, Dr. Kotler is a university in himself.
A benevolent teacher who has bestowed the world with the invaluable treasure called marketing.
Dr. Philip Kotler means he provides values and solutions to the world of marketing. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Dr. Kotler, your presence is an enlightening learning journey, not just for us, but for the thousands of people watching us live across the globe.
I send my best wishes to Jane and your university and all of India. Thank you.
have more than 80,000 participants attending this event from more than 90 countries. Can we use gross national happiness instead of GDP in least developed countries, as it includes ethical values and good governance? The question is in reference to the rampant increase in corruption in some LDC and developing countries like India, Brazil, and Bangladesh.
Yeah, it's GDP definitely is not the measure of happiness.
All at J.M. Smith that we were supposed to be a good supplier to our customers, be a good customer to our suppliers, be a good employer to our employees, be a good citizen of our community. This conference and in everything that the Jan Center and its associates are doing.
So your knowledge is your wealth. Your intelligence is your wealth. Your personality is your wealth. That is your dollar. I started with $1 in my pocket, school dropout, 8th standard, but I'm here in front of you with 1 lakh students, with the campuses across the country, 1 million students. And before I started in education, I already created 3,500 entrepreneurs.
Leading from behind is also the best position to develop future leaders. From here, one can see who is most effective at handling obstacles and also influencing the rest of the team for better and worse. While building a compelling case for gender diversity, advancing women leadership in the workplace should consider all these dimensions. It is indeed an honor and a privilege to be invited at the International Research Summit AVLOKAN. The literal meaning of AVLOKAN is the art of self-realization.
If you complete this cycle, it becomes a very sustainable model wherein there is no shortage of resources for conducting further research if you make it applied. And I must reiterate that I do not undermine the importance of fundamental research or purely academic research. This needs to be kept in mind as far as research as an activity is concerned for academic institutions. Now, being such a patient listener, students, particularly you all, I don't have enough words to thank you for what you have put out. I think all attention of the university is keeping you all in mind, and you will be the ultimate beneficiary of whatever you are trying to do.
Thing is to redesign the banking system so that they are devoted to do the work, the whole bank, not just tiny window in the conventional banks.
The bank in Bangalore is doing very well, bank for the poor, and is doing very well in
Thank you. Thank you. I'm glad to hear that.
It's at 6,000 crore level they have reached, Grameen. It's all your Professor Mohammed Yunus. And they have been effectively doing it for the poor, and poor is becoming better and better. Even if a vegetable vendor is there, he's able to earn 5 lakh rupees a year and pay his fees for his children. So your philosophy is working across the world.
Thank you so much. I'm glad to hear that.
So the next decade is about 7 Ds. Disease is not going away so easily. So I cannot predict what will happen, but yes, I do see it is causing the digital divide between rich and poor. But at the same time, you see, with respect to my previous answer as well, that these technologies are making field level for every.
Skills and network. So skills plus network is success. Only success in networking is not in finding the right person, but in becoming the right person. True value of networking lies in helping others. Now,
regarding introverts and the connect with networking, I just wanted to say that a lot of people who are actually introverts and they feel hesitant regarding networking. They feel like that it is not for me. But I think your talk has definitely motivated them, and I think now they can go ahead with it.
Our weaknesses represent our greatest opportunities for development. Plant many seeds, and not all of them actually grow up to be a fully nurtured plant. Some of them do, right? So you expose them to many things, and you take a step back and you start seeing where they're flourishing, and kind of build a theme around it, right? There's a theme around like a pool of talents which are around that theme. Start identifying and observing that theme. And as parent and as role models, just nurture, just provide the nurturing, giving them that opportunities, and they will thrive. They'll just do what best they can do.
For all the people who are yet to start their corporate jobs, who are yet to start their entrepreneurship journey, my dear friend, this is going to happen with you also. Unless and until you understand that the funnel that needs to be inverted. Okay, so in today's dynamic market, in today's global market, it all begins with networking and building the relationship.
So the bad comes with the good, as I pointed out in so many of the examples.
How do we differentiate ethical, moral, and legal behaviors in our course of achieving our life goals? Don't the three behaviors overlap and create confusion in the process of achieving our goals of life?
The severity of the bad, number one, and ease of implementation, the other thing. Now,
I want to share the idea that this is the way we respect other people. We don't do it by holding their hands in an age of COVID. We do it by the Asian way, actually, of acknowledging their presence and their importance and their dignity. So I thank all of you for sharing your thoughts.
What light means to the darkness, that is what Dr. Kotler means to the leader in me.
Dr. Philip Kotler, to me, is the inventor, creator, and preserver of contemporary marketing.
For me, Dr. Kotler is a university in himself.
A benevolent teacher who has bestowed the world.
Good evening, sir. Good evening, sir.
Good evening. Good evening.
Good evening, sir.
Good evening. Dr. Varsha, I'm audible, visible?
Yes, sir, you are perfectly, sir.
Okay.
Yeah, Chavi, you can continue, not a problem. 6 o'clock is start.
Yeah.
Dr. Philip Kotler means he provides values and solutions to the world of marketing. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Dr. Kotler, your presence is an enlightening learning journey, not just for us, but for the thousands of people watching us live across the globe.
I send my best wishes to Jane and your university and all of India. Thank you.
Good evening, sir.
Good evening. Good evening.
Dear participants, welcome to our 9th-day International Entrepreneurship Summit, the most awaited event of the year 2022, AVLOKAN 2.0. Requesting all participants connected with us in this journey through Facebook Live and Zoom platform to stay tuned with us. We are going to begin in next few minutes.
Good evening, sir.
Good evening, sir.
Good evening. Good evening.
Dear participants, welcome to our 9th-day International Entrepreneurship Summit, the most awaited event of the year 2022, AVLOKAN 2.0, requesting all participants connected with us in this journey through Facebook Live and Zoom platform to stay tuned with us. We are going to begin in the next couple of minutes.
Namaste, sir.
Namaste, madam. Namaste.
Good evening, sir.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening, sir.
Good evening, sir.
Good evening. Good evening, everyone.
Vaisakhi, you can start. Sir is just joining.
Good evening, sir.
Yeah, sir has come.
Sir, good evening.
Good evening, Dr. Saab. Good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening, Dinesh sir.
Good evening. Good evening.
Namaste.
Good evening, sir.
Namaste, and a very good evening, participants, delegates, speakers, and dignitaries. Welcome to our 9-day International Entrepreneurship Summit of AVLOKAN 2.0 on Beyond Sustainability, Trends in Regenerative, Socially Responsible Community Ventures, organized by Vidyanidhi, Student Research and Development Cell, in association with Gyanidhi, Faculty Research Cell of Center for Management Studies, chain deemed to be university. Dear participants, we began with the session 4 days ago with your immense support and presence, with a desire to continue this journey for upcoming day with the same verb. Thank you once again to all of you for joining in and making this summit valuable. And on this note, I would like to invite Dr. Rama L, presenting to you our legendary speaker of the session. Over to Dr. Rama.
Thank you, Professor Vaisakhi. Namaste to all. With immense respect and gratitude, I feel honored to take this privilege to welcome our first speaker of the session, Dr. Raj Singh. Dr. Raj Singh is the Vice Chancellor of Jain deemed to be University, Bangalore. His 40 years of experience includes 27 years in education sector. He has been the Vice Chancellor of various prestigious universities across India. He has also served the Indian Air Force for 13 years. A consultant, trainer, institute academic administrator, teacher, speaker, and education entrepreneur, Dr. Singh is a chartered financial analyst, master's in economics, and PhD in strategic finance. He is known for his oratory skills and innovative approach in higher education and also a TEDx speaker. A strong proponent of outcome-based inter and transdisciplinary education and research, he has been instrumental in designing innovative pathways in collaboration with universities globally. A trainer and consultant for Indian and multinational companies, Dr. Singh has trained over 5,000 teachers in schools as well as higher education. Dr. Singh has published and presented many research papers and has delivered keynote addresses in more than 80 conferences and had been a panelist in many TV shows. He has featured as one of the movers and shakers on Daily World Post and My Icon on FM channel in 2016 and 2017. He represented India at the International Design Summit held in Milan, Italy in 2013. Widely traveled and a visiting professor at prestigious universities and institutions, he has been a member of various advisory boards and has been conferred several awards. He is also the vice co-chair, ASSOCHAM, Karnataka chapter. He has developed the unique transdisciplinary project-centric learning at Jain deemed to be university, which will take education to the intersection of research and practice during Jain 2.0. Dear sir, it gives us immense pleasure to welcome you to deliver your profound thoughts. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Rama ma'am. Good evening to everyone. Dear Dr. Dinesh Neelkant, my faculty colleagues, Dr. Varsha Agrawal, the convener of the summit, academics, scholars, students, delegates who have joined from all over the world, ladies and gentlemen. At the outset, I thank Dr. Dinesh and Dr. Varsha Agrawal and all the faculty team to have invited me for today's talk. It's an opening session on this day, and in the past, we have had legendary speakers from all over the world. I had the opportunity of listening to most of them. Today, whatever I say should be taken as coming from someone who is both a failed as well as successful entrepreneur. I failed in some, I've been successful in some. As someone who has set up as the first Vice Chancellor at 2 greenfield universities, which means the groups had no background of education, and it becomes difficult to start university in such a setting. Take it from someone who has revived, it cannot be appropriate to call it a sick university, but a university which has been in trouble for a few years. And I had been given the responsibility, and with the support of everyone, I could revive that. And also a couple of universities which I've had the fortune of taking to the next level. I think you should also take it from someone who was not so fortunate enough to get formal education from elite institutions in India as well as globe, and largely learned from lab called life. Naturally, today, whatever I speak will be in the context of how to develop an entrepreneurial university, which can help create the entrepreneurial ecosystem in the country. Though I am from a rural background in state of Haryana, I've been reasonably good in academics. People said I've been academically excellent. So that background also may come as I speak. Most of the key terms which will represent my talk and are the key words in the journey which I've undertaken called Jan 2.0, I did remark in my opening address on 17th of January. They're given in the background. My colleagues in the office have been able to design it for me. Just to check, is my screen visible to everyone?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yes.
So I'll put it on slide show. And whenever Dr. Varsha, please help me. Connectivity, I can't be heard or can't be seen. Do let me know.
Sure, sir. Sure, sir.
You know, we have had some great renowned speakers, as I said, since beginning, and they have spoken on a variety of topics. But the topic chosen by me, which is very kindly approved by the organizing committee, also will bring in front of you my own evolution as a person. There have been many interesting phases as I developed this thought over the last few days, which also be visible as I talk, which you can feel as I talk. I was told that I have been in education for over 27 years now. 1994, September to be more precise, I started my academic career after I left the Indian Air Force, having served for 13 years plus. It was a new field for me. Did not have any entrepreneurial education, but as the environment was changing, it required more and more entrepreneurial approach to administer education. You'll also find some kind of flavor of that experience as I proceed. In these 28 years plus, certain things have really bothered me, and more so in the Indian context, which I have been part of all these years. And me and many of us sitting today are also the product of the science system, and therefore the difficulty becomes even more crucial. And one of the things we have been often in India been accused for is that we are not able to produce employable graduates. We're producing a brigade of unemployable people. There was a parallel development of a sector which is called the alternative education, or people call it by different names. They were so harsh, most often unreasonably, illegitimately, that Indian education at times was told that they're producing only about 6 to 7% employable people, which I believe is an unfair share of the blame. Of late, we've been talking about India's global standing in the rankings of good institutions and universities. It's only of late that some of our institutions have started appearing in these lists. I've seen discrimination of various kinds when it comes to funding of new ventures and startups, though it's a late start in case of India, as we'll share with some of the data. In summary, we as teachers have been labeled as something called Brahmanic in Hindi and Sanskrit, which means who preach rather than train employable graduates who can be useful for the economy and the society. Startups have been failing at alarmingly high rate. If you just reflect on day one, the average rate of failures was as high as around 90, 91, 92%. Some said 70 to 90%. In some countries, it's been as bad as 97%. But I think average which has come out in the summit is around 92, 93% have been failures, which is very, very alarming. And there are many other such things which have bothered as I undertook my own journey of education as a career. And therefore, if I look at all this, the only thought which comes to my mind that can the universities like Jan and some of the universities whose case studies have been presented over the last 4 or 5 days do something and reduce this alarmingly high rate of failures of startups? I personally believe we can. The need is to create an ecosystem. The need is to change the paradigm of teaching learning. It was presented yesterday by Professor Bruce Kingma of Syracuse University that how beautifully they have created an ecosystem of entrepreneurship. And he said it is in our blood. I think it should enter the DNA of every institution which wants to be entrepreneurial and therefore contribute to the innovation system of the nation we live in. If you read the bottom split of my first slide, it says if you put fences around people, you get sheep. Give people the room they need. Room to speak, room to function, room to bring innovative ideas rather than suppressing them. In some of my training sessions, I've been talking about various types of conflict resolution styles of individuals. And one is owl and one is a crocodile, which hides. And it is said that the worst kind of transition in anyone's life could be if you turn from owl to the other kind of conflict resolution where you withdraw, completely withdraw, first from the problem, then from the organization, then from life and yourself. And therefore, we as leaders, we as teachers, entrepreneurs, parents, should ensure that nobody undergo that kind of transformation in life and therefore give them space. It applies to equally our own children. I found this beautiful quote from Wayne Gretzky, a leading goal scorer in National Hockey League. It's from the ice hockey, the sport. And he says, I skate to where the puck is going, not where it has been. Many of us, teachers included, entrepreneurs included, while we need to respect the past, but we don't have to revere it. We don't have to get attached to the past so strongly that we can't detach from this. And if that be so, we are sure to perish. And that is the fundamental message I want to communicate today as we undertake the journey of innovation and entrepreneurship, particularly in the context of Gen 2.0 as I highlighted. And therefore, the agenda I have kept for today's talk, 40-45 minutes, which have been assigned to me. First, we'll try to understand what is innovation, because large number of students are there who are just being initiated into this. And then I'll recall some of my own random collisions in life, which have shaped me, which have made me as a teacher, which made me as an academic entrepreneur and education entrepreneur. We'll also look at some of the disruptive changes which are taking place, which according to me are more like collisions, mental collisions, environmental collisions, and how do we learn from that? The third thing I have kept that how, as a teacher, entrepreneur, academic administrator, researcher, I've tried to listen to these threads and integrate. I believe that I have been reasonably good in integrating various concepts. I'll try to bring that to the fore. I'll also briefly discuss what actually is the organizational reality in today's context, whether academic institutions or corporate organizations. What should be the desired ecosystem in the universities, which enables collisions? And at the end, I'll present a recommended model for education, which has been tested. And as we move forward beyond this, as we rise out of the pandemic, earlier COVID and Omicron and various variants, I also believe that these parameters will keep changing constantly, because there's nothing going to be like a new normal, because new normal will be dynamic. It'll keep changing very, very frequently. And therefore, I think defining a new normal may be a futile exercise. As you understand innovation, I went through many, many definitions, and I was looking at the most commonly understood and the simplest definition what innovation is. And I found this in a dictionary, Merriam-Webster's, which said, it's the introduction of something new. Now, the something new can be a simple refinement, or it can be disruptive. It can be significant. We'll see how these two types of innovations can be differentiated. Diverse and large group of people are smarter than an elite few. Now, this means that we need more and more people as we undertake the journey of innovation, because one person has patterns of thinking. Often we are not able to go out of the mold in which we think, the patterns in which we think. And therefore, diversity is something which is extremely, extremely important. Please give me just 1 second. So, मेरा सेशन चल रहा है वो summit में, I'll just call it. Sorry for the interruption. So we need diversity of people who discuss, and often we should have people who are smarter than us. They're also better at solving problems, fostering innovation, coming to wise decisions, and even predicting the future. That's the beauty of coming together, as was beautifully said in 2010 by Carl Dominics. If you look at the innovation ideas in terms of systems and processes, innovative companies grow faster and more profitably than the rest. Empirically, it has been found that there's average 11% of extra revenues and up to 22% increase in earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. I'm sure students of management and others, or those entrepreneurs, will understand these terms very, very well. Innovation requires open collaboration. The best innovators are very likely to support open collaborations, both within the company and with the external parties, whereas the rest rarely do so. 3.3 times more likely support open collaborations if you have that innovative ecosystem. The irony somehow is that when you implement something innovative in terms of some of the systems, whether performance metrics or any other process, 71% executives have been found to accept appropriateness of the innovation. They appreciate it, that yes, there can't be any better way. This is the only way to do. But when it comes to implementation, only 31% have been able or have been found to use it for actionable purposes, or they've been able to implement it. Now, this basically represents the gap between what we say and what we do, and boils down to the question of how effective we are in implementing the thoughts. Why do so many innovations fail? I pulled out some of the regions from one of the blogging sites. And this was very, very recent. It says that 11 out of 12 startups fail. I did mention about 90, 91, 92% fail. It matches with that. And 19 out of 20 product innovations failed. And that's what I said is an alarmingly high rate. But then if you go and look at the reasons why they fail, whether startups or innovative ideas, the first one and the highest, which is about 60%, the audience said, not engaging customers plus employees, which means we didn't discuss with a diverse group of people. Lack of cultural support. This can be organizational culture, which has evolved over a period of time, which has inbuilt resistance into this. This was equally important factor. Lack of top leadership support at the organization level, at the division level, SBU level, or departmental level, depending on what kind of organization we're talking about, which is again an equally important factor. Poor, misaligned strategy, lack of skills and talent in the people who are in the project team or who are responsible for implementing it, or for whom it is being implemented. Innovate like they do regular operations. They start comparing innovative ideas with the normal operations we have been undertaking for many, many years and decades. And I think this is one of the very, very important factor which brings in some kind of conflict. Failures to integrate innovation onto the core values, core activities, which we just cannot do away with. And we fail to integrate with that, and failure to execute, which I just mentioned some time back, failure to learn, lack of speed, and we said too much of risk involved in this. I think these factors collectively, if you look at, they are the reasons for innovations failing, but I'll look at maybe first 2-3 of them more importantly, and therefore we need to create those spaces. And when I say spaces, do not mean only physical. There's a room, there's a cafeteria, there's a terrace, there's a area earmarked in the campus or the company premises. I think these spaces could be physical, virtual, as well as mental spaces, and where we face these random collisions. In fact, I read a paper which titled was Random Collisions of Unusual Suspects, and its acronym was RUCKUS. I wanted to avoid that. I wanted to keep it more positive. And therefore, I thought I'll talk about creative collisions. The typical approach which is followed to innovation in most organizations is so aptly represented by this diagram, which say there are normally 4 pillars. Capabilities, which mean the abilities and the resources available with organization, which is trying to be innovative or moving towards innovation. It is the structures and the systems, organizational structures and processes to institutionalize. Normally, we adopt very informally or loosely defined structures, which may create hindrance in implementation of something very scientific, something very technical, which is system driven. It's the strategy, the plan to achieve long-term goals, which may be appropriate or inappropriate, but has a very, very important and crucial role in the success of innovation. And the 4th one is culture, the way things are done, value, and the ways of working. Now, this is mostly unconscious. I am recalling that famous Geert Hops's study on culture, which covered more than 50 countries, and said that culture is partly unconscious and silent, which is not heard, which is not seen. And that makes it very, very crucial when you undertake the process of change. An extreme right have given a diagram where when you question, when you also appreciate, and this is called sense of wonder. Mostly people close to the new ideas, the openness I'm referring to. And sense of wonder is that when we listen to somebody else, how do we appreciate? Maybe it's just 1% of what expected, but we definitely have something to take as a takeaway from anybody we interact with, anybody we come across. And therefore, we should create intentional rather than incidental organizational culture of innovation. Many organizations have had innovations, they just happened. They evolved because of the history of the people they joined. Most of times they were individual specific. They were not made part of the system. And therefore, it stops with the person. Yesterday, when Dr. Kim was talking, he did mention when he talked about evolution of entrepreneurship, and he says that leadership changed and the interesting programs continued, which people were interested, and which means indirectly not everything continued. That was the hidden message in that. This is story in every organization, whether academic or commercial organization. Can we teach our students that how to institutionalize innovation rather than doing it by hit and trial? Can there be a process? Let me mention a few of the random collisions which I have had in my life and which will contribute to what I'm going to present in terms of the model which I referred to. I'll elaborate some of them. The first one was a remote connection with the NEAT concept at MIT. NEAT, many of you must have read the concept at MIT, USA, which says New Engineering Education Transformation Initiative. NEAT initiative is called as. You can Google, you can find this concept. It's about 21, 22 page PDF document. I came across a case study as a student of management, which I use in my classes, which has been done by Harvard Business School on Deshpande Foundation. Deshpande Foundation is an Indian organization mainly operating in the Karnataka, the place called Hubli, and they've expanded further to Kakatia in Telangana, and they are establishing many, many other initiatives in some of the foreign universities, particularly in the US, including MIT. The third, I had a virtual encounter with the founder of JAN, which I want to elaborate, and how it has shaped my thought process and in the evolution of the concept which I've been talking to about, and then finally ending up in Bengaluru, which is a very, very interesting city. The unusual connivance which I often refer to between or among COVID-19, Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan, or Self-Reliant India initiative of the Government of India, Honorable Prime Minister, which was immediately after COVID-19 struck, the new National Education Policy 2020, and an extension of that, which has been recently announced as late as July 2021, Academic Bank of Credit. I came across a very, very motivating and insightful video depicting an interview of John C. Maxwell. We'll talk more about him. I reflected on Maharishi Patanjali, a South Indian saint, that how he talked about transcending limitations and distinguished the dead from the dormant. Very, very inspirational quote from Yoga Sutras. I'm sure this is one name which almost everyone in education would know, Sir Ken Robinson, late Ken Robinson, who passed away last year in August. And one of the epilogues of one of his TED Talks, the most fascinating concept I have learned, which is going to be integrated with the concept. And finally, a series of articles or series of features, the supplement of the Economic Times, which the Friday feature called Corporate Dossier, consecutively 8 weeks in 2002, 3, 4, around that time, it featured where Heg Baruch and Sumantra Ghoshal, our own late Sumantra Ghoshal, talked about something called crossing the Rubicon. I'll talk slightly more in detail about it and try to integrate these concepts, these physical, mental, and psychological collisions into the concept I'm talking to you about. And the message which I get from all this is there are adjacent opportunities which exist in abundance. It exists above me, it exists below the surface, it exists on left, right, in front of me, at the back of me. The only need is to see it. And that's why I thought it appropriate to mention these collisions. This is the case study. Those who are interested, they can refer to this. This case was written in 2011, which introduced, at least to me, the concept of sandbox, creating a bottom-up entrepreneurial ecosystem. In Hubli, this organization headed by Guru Deshpande and his wife, who went bankrupt, almost bankrupt a couple of times, have created the magic of the entrepreneurial spirit among the people from countryside, among the so-called underprivileged or less privileged people, less exposed people, and thousands and thousands of entrepreneurs have been created thanks to their initiative. But the major takeaway from this case study for me was, which I have mentioned in this quote, Desh said, Desh means Mr. Deshpande, we never know what kind of idea will work and what will not. Ideas that seem great fail, and ideas that seem bad succeed. But we can predict with some certainty what sort of people will succeed, even if it takes them several tries. Clearly, the emphasis has been placed on the individuals rather than the ideas. Seemingly great ideas, they say they fail, and therefore, when they extend financial support, irrespective of their social economic background, they emphasized on more meeting the people multiple times and then taking a decision whether to give them financial help or not. And this case study highlighted that people at the bottom of pyramid have entrepreneurial spirit. As you would know, most of you, bottom of pyramid was introduced by none other than C.K. Prahlad, and I'll be talking to you about in another encounter, which I'll mention. Coming to Bengaluru, which is legitimately the Silicon Valley of India and perhaps of Asia. Some people talk about it, some people talk about it in suppressed voice, but it's well on its way to emerge as the Silicon Valley of Asia, and legitimately so. Look at some of the stunning statistics. As of January 2022, more precisely 10th of January, this month, India is home to 83 unicorns out of 61,400 startups, with total valuation of $277.77 billion worth. The year 2021, 2020 and 2019 had the highest number of unicorns, 44, 10 and 9 respectively. If you look at 83 total, which is since 2011, when we had the first unicorn, more than 50% happened in 2021. In 2022, already 2 companies have become unicorns, and 10th and 14th of January. Bengaluru is India's unicorn capital with 34 of unicorns headquartered. Out of 83, 34 are headquartered or have origins in Bengaluru, followed by Delhi NCR, which include Delhi, Gurgaon, and Noida, is 23, Mumbai 16, Pune 4, Chennai 3, Jaipur, Thane, and Hyderabad 1 each. This is how the tally of 83 is broken up. The another thing which needs to be noticed is that while we see unicorns active in tier 1 cities, the ecosystem is not restricted and is proliferating across districts. 636 districts in the country have caught up with the favor of entrepreneurship and startups. And also the sectors, if you look at traditional sectors as well as new sectors, are registering their presence in the startup ecosystem. As of October 2021, 38 companies the world over have achieved the decacorn, the next league, out of which India has 2. And rightly so, on average, today, 1 out of 10 unicorns globally have been born in India. Now, this is no mean achievement. Particularly India's ecosystem has not been as good as if you see the Silicon Valley in US and some of the cities in UK, particularly London kind of cities, which was referred to by Gary Stewart on day one when he spoke eloquently about the funding and the evolution of unicorns and other startups the world over. So 1 out of 10 is no mean achievement, and the way it is catching up, it's only going to increase in the times to come. Look at the distribution of these 83 unicorns. 44 unicorns with a total valuation of 92.77 billion were born in 2021. This last year, just ended less than a month ago. So if you look at the right-hand side part, which represents 2021, 2022, we have 2, and 2020, about 5, and you look at the numbers, 2017 gave a miss, and there were no unicorns which came to the League of Unicorns in India. And then 16, 15, and first, as I said, came in 2011. I did mention about this video, which says that how can you ensure self-growth through self-understanding? The point I want to highlight is point number 1, where he says that 1 is too small a number to achieve greatness. You need to work in teams. You need to network. You need to work with people, and people who are divergent in terms of thinking. And the second thing he said, which is a message for all the leaders, he said, leadership is influence, nothing more, nothing less. And therefore, we need to find ways and means of influencing people and acts which can add value to others. Otherwise, it says we can't influence people unless we do the act. Knowing self is a must for self-growth. And finally, the masterstroke, he says in his video, in his interview with one of the TV channels, he says shifting from goal mindset to growth mindset changes everything. Because goal is limiting at times, growth is not limiting. And therefore, if you look at the history of all those companies and entrepreneurs who have achieved great success, they never looked at the goals. They put in their best efforts, best foot forward, and they grew. And that's what the message which says, and he says, in life, we learn more from difficulties, failures, and most importantly, from diversities. And that is one thing which we avoid getting into. And therefore, entrepreneurship is not the game which person can play alone. You need a team, and team which is with divergent skills, not the common skills, but only the goal and in terms of growth you want to achieve is the common thought. Very, very powerful, and I'll recommend if you can see through great lessons for leaders and entrepreneurs. He is one person who has written more than 100 books, collectively sold more than 32 million copies. He's one person who has coached and mentored presidents of the nations and CEOs of Fortune 500 companies more than anybody else can even think of. And therefore, this thought takes me to the next collision when I laid hands on this book by Swami Vivekananda, Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. It's believed to have lived in South India somewhere 3rd or 4th century. Nobody knows when exactly he lived. But his Yoga Sutras are learning for lifetime. And I quote, one of my favorite quotes says, when you're inspired by some great purpose, some extraordinary project, all your thoughts break the bounds. Your mind transcends limitations. Your consciousness expands in every direction, and you find yourself in a new, great, and wonderful world. Dominant forces, which might have been lying dormant, they come alive. Faculties and talents come alive, and you discover yourselves to be a greater person by far more than ever you dreamt of yourself to be. Such profound thought. And he says how we as individuals can transcend our limitations by coming together, by forming a team of complementary skills and values and expertise, because alone nobody can have that. We as a team can transcend limitations, and we should be able to distinguish between the dead and the dormant, because dormant can't be equated to dead. Let me further elaborate. My all-time favorites are Ken Robinson, one of the most profound speakers and thinker in education, whom we lost last year in August. And if you look at just one clipping, which I'll make you listen to, it was about 18, 19 minutes video. I have truncated to just 1 minute. And that's the message I got from this as far as the context of today's topic is concerned. He said, just beneath the surface are the seeds of possibilities. I say they're all around us in every direction, all 360 degrees, waiting for right conditions to come about. With the organic system, if conditions are right, life is inevitable. And he says, you can't control individuals. You can control the systems and processes and the environment and the climate. He says it's all about climate control. He says education is not a mechanical system, it's a human system. Most often when we put systems and processes in place, we start treating it mechanically, which would be a great mistake. And we need to create right conditions for the end. Let me go to a clipping, which I'm sure each one of you will appreciate.
Not far from where I live is a place called Death Valley. Death Valley is the hottest, driest place in America, and nothing grows there. Nothing grows there because it doesn't rain, hence Death Valley. In the winter of 2004, it rained in Death Valley. 7 inches of rain fell over a very short period. And in the spring of 2005, there was a phenomenon. The whole floor of Death Valley was carpeted in flowers for a while. What it proved is this, that Death Valley isn't dead. It's dormant. Right beneath the surface are these seeds of possibility, waiting for the right conditions to come about. And with organic systems, if the conditions are right, life is inevitable.
Now, this is the part of the larger talk, which I referred to.
Not far from where I live.
Brings me to one of the most influential pieces of literature and the thoughts I have read, which I did refer to in those collisions, is Sheikh Baruch and Sumanta Ghoshal. It has really, really helped me in all my consulting assignments. And this was around the time when me and my colleagues in one of the business schools I was heading were having a change management assignment in the west coast of Karnataka. One of the most difficult assignments and one of the longest, which lasted for 2 years. These thoughts really supported us. And they say, they've cited from this beautiful book called A Bias for Action. Essentially, they say that there are some people who only talk, they don't act. There are people who act, and there are people who see it through. And he brings out the subtle difference, these authors, and categorize people into 4 quadrants. If you look at, he talks about energy. On the x-axis, you look at negative and positive. As you move towards right, it becomes positive. And you move up the intensity of organizational energy. Having energy is one thing, the quality as well as the intensity both matter, in fact. Quality means, where do you put energy as far as the use is concerned? And like this, they come up with these 4 quadrants. Resignation zone, where neither the intensity is high nor the quality is high. These are the people who come and go. It doesn't matter what happens around them. If the intensity is higher, but the quality is low, people become aggressive. They have a lot of ideas, but they don't know what to do. They keep on flipping around like a rudderless plane, directionless. Direction and focus extremely, extremely important. On the right-hand side, if the quality of energy is positive, but intensity is not there, it's a good, feel-good kind of factor. That the people which are in majority, in fact, as high as about 40 to 50%, according to Baruch and Ghoshal, they constitute major part of the organization. But around 10% who have both the quality positive as well as intensity high, they are in the passion zone, and they are the ones who create, they are the ones who bring most of the innovations. And therefore, It's not a game of majority, it's a game of minority, the selected few. The collisions which they say you create in organizations, whether physical or mental or psychological, should push people towards the top right corner rather than the bottom left corner. I think the message is loud and clear where exactly the organizational energy should be focusing. And they summarize that 90% of managers spin their wheels by procrastinating, detaching emotionally, and distracting themselves with busy work, while only 10% act purposefully to get truly important work done. If that be the ratio, implementation of innovative ideas becomes extremely, extremely difficult. The need is to increase this 10% to 11, 12, 13, 14, 20, 25, as much as we can. And that requires a different kind of approach, different kind of culture in organizations to be created. A Bias for Action, the book which I referred to, shows that great managers produce results not by motivating others, but by engaging their own willpower. They are the people who don't get defeated, who don't get demoralized. They may pause, they may take a step back, but only to come up with more vigorous kind of thought process, more sharper actions, and more stronger a thought. Strategies combine this own willpower and action-taking abilities and explore ways to marshal the willpower of others, to encourage collective action. Again, the word is collective action. It highlights that no individual can do anything much as far as innovation and change is concerned. And if the system and this collective action can either put a spoke in the wheels of procrastination and distraction, or make it irrelevant, make it negligible, and make them irrelevant, can be another approach which both these great thinkers emphasize. Disruptive changes, which I talked to you about, miniaturization of technology, where you can hold everything in hand. On the left-hand side, if you look at the picture, if you can converge from a big room where you have mainframe computer, you have a stereo, you have big speakers, you have a router for connecting on the internet, all that has come into a small pocket. That's the power of technology. We have faster, cheaper computing power, and other technologies are completely revolutionizing the way the world is functioning. It is said that by end of this decade, 2020-30, by end of the decade, companies will either have use of AI or go out of business. No third type of company will be there. That's the power of artificial intelligence. AI will reach human level intelligence by 2029, to be more precise. More electrical vehicles, powerful batteries, which can take up to 500, 600 kilometers, cleaner and cheaper power, lesser child mortality, reduced poverty. All that is possible because of technology. And COVID has taught us the concept of power of exponential. That if you look at the red line, it's linear, otherwise exponential moves sharply up after a certain stage as COVID cases multiplied in this world. In the bottom line, what will happen in this decade, brain-computing interface will come in, and we will have to look at automating the routine work, because that's not worth spending a time, but humanize the exceptional. We will be able to do jobs which computers and robots can't do. Just one example, on the left-hand side, you have example of Kodak. The number of photos have gone up exponentially after 1930, and if you look at till 2020, it's into trillions, 1.6 trillions in 2017, and the company is going out of business. You know why? Analog photos is not the future. Digital photos caught up, and if you could not upgrade, we vanished. And the right-hand side, you have the much talked about competition and the talk about Netflix and Blockbuster. Look at the quote which the CEO of Blockbuster said in 2008. Netflix is not on the radar screen in terms of competition, and see what it has done to Blockbuster is bankrupt already, which was not to be seen on the horizon. Innovation, it's something which is not incremental. Entrepreneur, startup owners are someone who think of not marginal but disruptive changes. Look at this beautiful statement when he came out with car. He said, if I'd asked the public what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse and not something called a car. Henry Ford said it long ago, in fact. Look at the unicorn space. It's getting heavy as you move from 2011 to 2015. This is global figures. The one I gave you from Bangalore or India was the latest one. Look at how it's becoming a crowded place. It's motivating to see that how more and more companies are getting into this club of unicorns. And therefore, we need to look at the possibilities increasing in the change environment. Listening to the thread as I come towards the last part of my presentation, there are common threads found in stories of people involved in creative coalitions. Leaders need to listen to them and weave a story. And the story is something which universities like us have to weave. These could be, there are managers who had faith in coalitions sometime before they had faith in themselves. They looked at the situation and started believing it. And that motivated them. Fearlessness about accepting risk, venturing into the unknown is something which they got from these coalitions. Embracing new challenges as opportunities to learn and grow, connecting the formal learning to real business situations. Now, the summary of what I have said so far in this part of my presentation is that leaders create spaces for random collisions among unusual suspects, not the known ones. The known ones are in any case with you, you know their ideas and thought processes. How do you develop tolerance for this? The threads then help in scripting these success stories. A lot can happen through raising hands and challenging status quo. There's an actual photograph in some of the deliberations we have had, heated discussions. The organizational reality today is something different, wherein there's a resistance to the disruptive innovations because initially you don't find customers for that. And therefore there's a favor for only the sustaining innovation, minor ones, because there's an audience, there's a customer segment which is comfortable with the use of it. But the growth comes from only disruptive changes. I think the organizations need to accept disruptive changes faster than only cosmetic changes. And therefore, if you look at on the right-hand side, look at the disruptive changes, they weigh lightly in the beginning, the normal ones weigh heavily, but in the ultimate, if the disruptive changes will bring in change. But by the time we get into that mode, time would have elapsed. We would have seen that we are already too late. And therefore, time is extremely important. We cannot be slow when we introduce changes. And therefore, you remember I had said that the people who work on the innovation and those who work on the normal operations, it's worth keeping them separately. We are excessively prescriptive, particularly in the university context. I'm reminded of what Jay Rao said day before yesterday. He said, if it was up to me, I'll finish examinations. It was music to my ears that somebody was talking about less of examination, more of assessment, because examinations not necessarily test what we need to test. And look at this profound statement said by General of US Army. He said, never tell people how to do things. Tell them what to do, and they'll surprise you with their ingenuity. Today, every institution, every university is, I think, crippled with this kind of thought. We want to be very systematic, everything well defined, students not given any way to think, any leeway to think, any flexibility to think, because you need conformity and compliance-based assessment. We need to believe in human genuinity of our youth and students. I think that is one most important thing I'll say in today's session. We need to transform our teaching learning processes where students can surprise us with what we could not even imagine. Another small video about a minute or so is by Melody Hobson, who is the chairwoman of Starbucks and the co-CEO of one of the venture funding companies. It highlights what Gary Stewart said on day one, that how women get less of funding, a minuscule percentage, how people are discriminated based on color, race, nationality, gender, and other factors. I think this brings out beautifully what I mean by this. Look at this beautiful clipping by this fascinating leader.
I think it's time for us to be comfortable with the uncomfortable conversation about race. Black, white, Asian, Hispanic, male, female, all of us. If we truly believe in equal rights and equal opportunity in America, I think we have to have real conversations about this issue. We cannot afford to be colorblind. We have to be color brave. We have to be willing as teachers and parents and entrepreneurs and scientists, we have to be willing to have proactive conversations about race with honesty and understanding and courage. Not because it's the right thing to do, but because it's the smart thing to do. Because our businesses and our products and our science, our research, all of that will be better with greater diversity. Observe your environment. At work, at school, at home. I'm asking you to look at the people around you purposefully and intentionally. Invite people into your life who don't look like you, don't think like you, don't act like you, don't come from where you come from. And you might find that they will challenge your assumptions and make you grow as a person.
A beautiful perspective in terms of what we should be doing as teachers and entrepreneurs, because let me come back to the presentation. Which window has opened? Yeah. That's the problem of keeping too many files open. Am I audible? You can see me?
Yes,
Yes,
sir.
sir,
Yes.
yes.
Yes, sir. Yes.
I think it's minimized somewhere. Anything other than is showing. Can somebody
In the meantime,
yeah.
Sir, in the meantime, I would like to acknowledge the presence of our next illustrious speaker of the evening, Juan Manuel Gonzalez. Welcome, sir. Warm welcome to you.
Thank you.
Hi, Joanne.
Welcome, Professor. I think this was the best thing I could do to reshare it.
Sure, sir.
My last slide, I think I'm winding up in 2 minutes. This is a model I developed, which is called Skill Entrepreneurship and Innovation Zone. On the right-hand side, if you look at collaboration leads to collisions, innovation, which we test ground for ideas and risk-taking. And the common thread weaves around a story in organizations as enabler, and we need tools and concepts to implement it. I implemented this about 2.5 years ago in one of the universities as an incubation of the idea. I'm happy to inform that in last 6 months, 73 projects we started in the university among various departments, including agriculture, science, management, psychology, and engineering. They have led to 100 patents in last 6 months. That's the power of concepts woven into the teaching learning process. This concept helped me to also integrate various concepts at the national level, which I think we are responsible, we are liable to address. And for example, the National Agriculture Policy of 2011, which talks about farm produce organizations to stop the influx of people going to metropolitan cities for job and not realizing the balanced economic development in the country. It served many, many purposes, and all these 72 projects which are going on, about 12 of them are on the verge of converting into a startup over next 1 year or so. That's the plan they have. The need is in the institutions to create these living labs and return the power to the learners. Otherwise, we will not be able to create that ecosystem and contribute to the innovation system of the nation, which we are expected to do. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Ma'am, even though I think I have overshot time, but any questions are there, I can take some of them.
Thank you so much, sir, for enlightening us and sharing your profound ideas with us. It's been an absolute pleasure to listen to you, sir. Now we have a question from our participant, Pratik, one of our students, sir. Innovation becomes a very important part, and once it's executed, how important it is for the core team to constantly re-innovate and rethink so as to bridge the gaps and prevent a disruption by the competitors, sir?
See, all through the summit, one thing which has come out very clearly that we shouldn't hesitate discussing the ideas from others. In fact, discussion with others and constant innovation will only keep us ahead. Maybe a slightly old story, but if you go back to 92, 93, the Intel story, how through copying Me Too kind of approach, Intel's profitability came down from some of the companies. They did a couple of things. One, they started protecting.
Don't keep, Uma might find something interesting tomorrow and leave.
Seema ma'am, if you could mute yourself. So what Intel did, they started protecting their copyrights more vigorously. They doubled their investment in R&D, and they said, if we don't make ourselves redundant, somebody else will make. I think that's the lesson we should draw. It doesn't mean that once we have innovated, it's gone forever. I think it's a constant process of innovation to keep ahead of the competition, which I would recommend. And that can be done only through an appropriate ecosystem in an organization.
Yes. So thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much. That was such an engaging and enlightening discussion, sir. We really learned a lot. Thank you once again from the bottom of our heart, sir. Thank you. And now I'd like
more questions I'll try to answer online. Thank you so much. Time management could have been better.
Sure, so you can take it from there only.
Yes. I'll keep on answering the questions. Yeah.
Yes, sir. So, yes, sir. So should I go in for another question, sir?
Yeah, please go ahead.
So another question that we had is shared interests are now replaced by seeking differences. Do you think such coalitions will always lead to, exponential innovation, sir?
My view is yes, because the history says that one man can't do much. In fact, it was only last week I was talking in one of the national level conferences. And after the debate in the panel discussion, the idea came was that collaboration rather than competition is the way forward. For example, any startup, if faces competition for large companies, or even let's say medium scale companies, forget about very large companies, can you really take them on? Answer is no. The best way is to collaborate with them, become ancillaries to them, learn from them, and then perhaps scale up your own business. I think it was also mentioned beautifully by, I think, Jay day before yesterday, that when you work after graduation, learn how to scale up, learn the tricks of the game, and then get into the business. You don't have to necessarily compete to excel. I think the competition is addressing a different market structure as far as economic theory is concerned, but collaboration is something which can help us become more successful in the environment which we see today. Because all these unicorns which you have seen in particularly last 1 year, you find, I think, a significant amount of collaboration leading them to what they have become today, and not the competition. Though there's a competition, but I think through collaboration with certain partners, certain players in the industry, they could gain that scale and size and the skill set and the market segment, which could perhaps help them compete with another such cluster emerging in the industry. So I think collaboration is something which we should seriously look at.
Thank you, sir. Thank you once again, sir, for such an engaging discussion. Thank you, sir. Now I'd like to hand over the stage to Professor Vaishaki.
Thank you, Dr. Abhishek. And before we move ahead, I would like to acknowledge the presence of Dr. Amritlal Bharadwaj, Professor, Cardiff Business School, UK, and Dr. Maithili P. Rao, Coordinator, Research Programs, Chain Dean to the University. A warm welcome to both of you for enlightening the session. And on this note, I would like to invite Professor Preetham K. to introduce our next illustrious speaker of the session. Over to Professor Preetham.
Thank you, ma'am. I feel immensely privileged to introduce our next speaker of the session, Juan Manuel Gonzalez. Mr. Gonzalez is the Executive Director of Engineer por Mexico with more than 8 years of experience managing international projects in the public and private sectors. He began his career as a business consultant at Deloitte. For 6 years, he served several clients in high-impact projects. Juan Manuel graduated with a bachelor's in business administration from Texas A&M University and with 2 master's degrees from Stanford University, one in business and one in education. Additionally, he obtained a certificate in public management and social innovation from Stanford University. Juan Manuel was born in Guadalajara, Jalisco. He lived there until the age of 14, then he moved to the United States in search of better educational opportunities. After spending 14 years outside Mexico, Juan Manuel returned to the country to become the executive director of Enseña por Mexico. He is passionate about education and dreams that one day all Mexicans will have access to an education that allows them to develop their full potential. Dear sir, it gives us immense pleasure to welcome you to deliver your views. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me. It's a pleasure for me to join this conference, this summit. I am very excited to share with you what it's like to lead an education nonprofit, focusing on the entrepreneurial skills that you will need in the education sector. I hope that many of you are considering starting a social organization or a nonprofit. So like my idea is to share with you what it's like to do. Of course, I cannot share all the details of many things, but I'm gonna focus on 3 main things, which is like what it's like to fundraise for a nonprofit, what is to attract and retain the best talent. And the last one is a board. How do you build a strong board? At the end of the day, they are the ones that can help you to increase your fundraising capabilities. But I am so happy to be here, and I'll be sharing my screen. So as Pritham say, I'm the executive director of Enseña por Mexico, and it is my dream job. So I'm gonna share with you my screen. So please let me know when you see it. There you go. You see it, right? Give me a thumbs up or something.
Yes, sir.
Perfect.
Yes, sir.
Perfect. So it is a pleasure for me to be talking about this, is because leading a nonprofit was something that I envisioned and thought about like since I was 20 years old. That after I started to work at Deloitte, I started to think like I was very privileged to have had a good education. And it was my time to think, how could I help other Mexicans in particular to have a great quality education? I'm gonna give you a little introduction of my journey in general, because I think it's important and it connects of the reason why I'm working now in the nonprofit sector. So my story starts with my parents. My parents are from a small community in Michoacan, which is one of the 32 states in Mexico, and a community with very limited resources. In fact, my mother never learned to read and write, and my father never had any formal education. So they moved to Guadalajara, which is in another state of Mexico, but is one of the largest cities of Mexico, a few years before I was even born. So in my case, I was born and raised in a city where there were more access to more educational opportunities. Even though in the neighborhood where I grew up in Guadalajara, there was a high crime rate, there were many problems, it was better than the communities that my parents were raised. So I took advantage of that. I always became very passionate about learning and education. And I'm the youngest out of 8 siblings. So I have 7 siblings, so a big family. So my father didn't have enough money to provide to us in Mexico. So he will always immigrate to the United States, as I have recollection. So given the USA is so close to Mexico, is one of the countries where many Mexicans, especially those ones that didn't have access to good opportunities in Mexico, go to the United States, work there, and then come back to Mexico for a few months and then go back to the United States. So that was the story of my life. And when I was 14 years old, my father tells me, why don't you come to the United States with me? You learn English, and then once you know English, probably more doors are gonna open and you can go back to Mexico and do whatever you want to. So I took that offer. But instead of just learning English, I wanted to go further. I was like, I cannot just stop on learning the language and don't just be done. So I decided that I was gonna develop more skills to obtain good grades to be accepted to a university in the United States. And that's what I did. So I focused very hard in high school, and luckily I obtained a scholarship to attend Texas A&M University, where I studied supply chain management. And after Texas A&M University, I decided to start my career as a management consultant at Deloitte Consulting. So the main reason, I'll be very transparent, that I joined Deloitte, it was because it was the company from my university in specific that gave you the better offers money-wise. They're the ones that paid the most from my university. So I was like very ambitious, and given my background, I wanted to get out of this poverty environment that I had grew up. So I decided I was gonna get a job at Deloitte no matter what because of that. But luckily, only 2 years after being at Deloitte, I started to notice when I will go back to Guadalajara and see my family, some friends that I grew up with, that their history had been very different to mine just because of education. So like in my case, like I was having this very good job, living in a nice house in Houston, Texas, while going back to Guadalajara in the neighborhood that I was born. Many of my friends had been incarcerated because they got involved with drug dealing. Many of them have been killed. Many of even my family members were in the same situation. And that's where I started to wonder, why am I not doing something to change this? Why am I just focusing on myself, having a nice job, living in the United States? And that's when my entrepreneurial aspect started to become to life. And I decided that I needed to go back to Mexico at some point and to dedicate my life to education, to provide access to quality education. So every Mexican, no matter where they have been born, they will have the opportunities to have a great life. So I started to do my research. How can I do this? Of course, coming from a lower socioeconomic status, I didn't have the money to start a nonprofit. So from scratch on my own. So I started to think, how can I do this? And first I was like, I need the entrepreneurship skills. So I need to find somewhere where I can develop. And number two, I need the education knowledge. I have been working on business most of the time, even though I have volunteered as a teacher many years, I still had not many theory pedagogy behind like my knowledge of education. And last one, it was the network. I was like, I don't have the money to do this nonprofit, so I need to find somewhere to create the network where I can fundraise this money. So I decided, well, after doing my research, that the perfect place to obtain those skills for me was Stanford University. Stanford University had this program in which you could do an MBA that had a strong focus on entrepreneurship, but at the same time, I could do a master's in education. So I was like, this is the best world. This is the best of both worlds for me. And then at the same time, like it was a place where very elite Mexicans will go. And that was my access. This is the people that I need to do my fundraising for the nonprofit. So I was like, I need to be accepted to this university no matter what. So I created this vision 1.5 years before I got accepted into the university. But I remember a lot of people telling me, and this is something that you're gonna confront as an entrepreneur, telling you that you cannot do it, that it is impossible what you're thinking. And that's what happens for me. Like, I think like getting to Stanford, I had a lot of people telling me, this is only for the elite. You don't have, you don't come from a private university, you won't get in. At the end of the day, I say like, no matter what, they're gonna accept me. And so I created this plan and they accept me. And Stanford was that place where literally I developed those skills that I told you that I was looking to develop: the entrepreneurial side, the education knowledge, and also the access to the network that I needed. and it was perfect. I loved it so much. And after Stanford, given that I was at Deloitte and they had given me a scholarship to go to Stanford, I had to return for 2 years. But after Deloitte, my plan to start to work in education in Mexico started to come together. After spending 14 years outside of Mexico, I found this organization that had already been developed. It had already 7 years of being operating, but it was still at an early stage, you could say, in many aspects. And that's what called my attention. So after many interviews, because this is also another challenge that I found, was that the board members of Teach for Mexico will be like, why would you want to come back to Mexico to make less money than you're making in the United States, to have a job that is more hard than the one that you're doing? And I was like, I want to do it because I have this passion for education and I want to help many Mexicans like myself to have a good education. And after 9 interviews, I cannot believe that I had to go through 9 interviews, but I guess I was not convincing them until finally, after 9 interviews, they tell me, you are the person that I think we want you to take over, over the CEO that have founded the Teach for Mexico, and to continue to develop the organization. And I was so happy. This was on November of 2018. I quit my job on Deloitte on November 3rd, and I started on November 5th at Enseña por Mexico. And it has been an amazing journey, very challenging. And that's what I'm about to share with you. But I think I want to summarize, like, I think part of the story, or like as an entrepreneur, I do believe that you have to truly believe on what you're doing. And if it is connected in some personal way to you, you're gonna do it no matter what. You're gonna try to push that organization to be the best organization. And for me, education is what matters the most to me. And it had to do because it gave me access to things that I never thought that I would have access to. And that is the reason why it became so important to me, to now that I had that privilege to use the knowledge that I had developed throughout the years through my education to now help other Mexicans do it. So I joined Enseña por Mexico, and one of our key phrases is origen no es destino, which means origin is not destination. And it has to do with the fact that many Mexicans, like my parents, do not have access to a good education, and these create barriers to access other opportunities that will allow them to develop their full potential. So that is the thing, that the main reason why I joined Teach for Mexico, because it connected with this vision that I have when I was 20 years old about creating this nonprofit that will help Mexicans have a better education. And you probably heard of Teach for India, so we are an equivalent of that in Teach for Mexico. But just for you to have a reference of what we do. But the reason we exist is because we believe that developing leadership, we can change an entire system. So what we do, we pretty much work with the public and the private sector to create a movement to ending educational inequity through the collaborations in schools in the most vulnerable communities. What we do, we recruit top talented individuals to join our program, which is a 2-year full-time program. And their goal is to go to these communities and to find ways to develop leadership in these communities and to find opportunities that will help students to have access to better education. They also teach, of course, and they do this through this 2-year program. But at the end of the day, our end goal is that these people, this top talent, is gonna fall in love so much with education that even after their commitment of 2 years is completed, they will wanna continue to go on for longer. And it happens. More than 70% of the entire Teach for All network continues in education, even though they come from many careers. And in Mexico in particular, is more than 80% of our fellows continue in the education sector. Right now, we are part of this global network called Teach for All, present in 61 countries. The main objective is collaborating for a world where educators, governments, families, and students work together to guarantee that children in their communities have the foundations they need to shape a better future for themselves and for all of us. So that's the reason why we exist. In Mexico, give you a perspective, this is the map of Mexico. We are currently in 10 out of the 32 states of Mexico. We have impacted more than 120,000 students directly through 9 cohorts of fellows. 583 fellows have completed our program, and we currently have 225 fellows in 184 schools in these 10 states of Mexico. Something innovative about Teach for Mexico is that we are one of the first countries in the Teach for All network to start placing fellows in early childhood. That happened in 2018 when I joined the organization. And there is something that I want to highlight. Even when you join an organization that is already established, you are always needed to think, what else can we do to continue to help or to fulfill the needs of our customers? In the case of Enseña por Mexico, we call them beneficiaries or people that we're impacting. But like thinking about, like there was also the opportunity to go into the helping students in early childhood centers and preschools was something that was very innovative in Teach for Mexico, because the whole Teach for All network have focused just on from first grade to the 12th grade of education, but we decided that there was the opportunity to take this program in early childhood, and we did it. And locally now, other 8 countries are doing the same. But I want to highlight that there is an opportunity to, even though you already have an established program, to always think, how can I continue to grow this program and develop new models to take this opportunity to the next level? And that's what we did. But like, one of the things that you need to develop as a nonprofit leader and also as a private leader is fundraising. And I'm gonna focus more here on the fundraising aspect of the nonprofit sector. But like in my case, as the executive director of Teach for Mexico, one of my main jobs is always asking for donations. 70% of my time is spent on talking to very high network individuals, to companies, to my own friends, and asking them to join my movement by donating to this organization. But I want to share with you some statistics that are like to let you see how challenging it is to do this in Mexico, because the philanthropy culture is not as developed as in other places. And in here in particular, I compare it to the United States, so you have a reference. But if we compare like what it's like to donate in Mexico, in 2020, Mexican nonprofits received 2.67 USD in donations, representing only a 0.25% of GDP. And if we compare it to the United States, there were 471.44 billion. Of course, the US is a bigger economy, so you expect more donations. But when you compare it in terms of GDP, Americans donate 2.25% of the GDP, and in Mexico, it's only 0.25. So it gives you a perspective that the culture of donating in Mexico is still not as developed. So if you want to fundraise in Mexico, you're confronting a biggest challenge, because you have to change the mindset of people to donate to you. And also I put the different people, the different groups that donate. In Teach for Mexico in particular, only 12% of our donations come from individuals. In the United States, is 69%. So it's a big difference. And for me, that is the biggest example that the culture of donating is not developed. But something that I have learned in Mexico is that the reason it's not as developed is because there is a lot of mistrust in nonprofits in Mexico, because unfortunately, For many years, there were many nonprofits that were just developed to avoid taxes. And so the many Mexicans developed this mistrust. So one of my main jobs as a fundraising in nonprofit in Mexico is to gain the trust of individuals. So for that reason, I want to share with you 2 frameworks that I use to make sure that I gain this trust of individuals and foundations, and I raise the money that I need to continue to operate my program. And one of the models is to actually create a great organization. How do you actually build a great organization? Is to pretty much you need to have a good processes, same as any other organizations. You need to have a good team. You need to have a good support system, like a good board. So you need to build a robust organization. Then you also need to focus on and know your donors. You need to make sure that you know, same as in the private sector, you need to know your customers or the people that are your investors. You need to know your donors and to know them very well. You also need to create an attractive brand. You need to make sure that people, they want to be associated with you. So you need to think, how do I make sure that I build the reputation so people, because of their urge to be associated with us, they're gonna donate to us. And then you need to create a mission with impact differentiated. And for this one, I think the connection is like the business model. So like in the case of the private sector, if you're thinking more of or something in the private sector, you need to make sure that you're creating a value that is so differentiated that nobody else can offer what you're offering. So in the terms of nonprofit, like the first step to make sure that people are gonna be donated to you is to create this great organization. The other aspect is your pitch, which you also need in any sector to do fundraising. In the nonprofit sector, there is this model that I truly love and recommend, but because it focuses on 3 elements. When I go to talk to a fundraiser, and I'm talking, some of them are asking them 300K USD. Like I'm really need to have the best pitch to make sure that when I leave that meeting, that person is gonna tell me, I'm gonna donate this big amount of money to you. And there are 3 elements that I use. The story of self. I think it's so important to make sure that people understand the reason why you're doing what you're doing. Like, why are you leading that organization? What are the elements of your life that connect with the reason of why you're focusing on doing the job or like pushing that entrepreneurial idea? The other aspect is the story of now. Like, why is so important for you to give me the money right now and not tomorrow? Like, I need it right now. So you need to make sure that you express this urgency and that the donor or the investors can see that need and the urgency. And the story of us, like, why so important that we do this together? Why can I not do it by myself? And what are the achievements that we have gotten as an organization? For example, in the story of NOWS, I focus more on sharing them how as a community we have impacted many students. We have developed the leadership of many fellows. So that are the elements that I focus on. And I truly recommend this for any sector, because definitely I see some comparisons of when many of my friends are focused on fundraising for their private organizations. I true that you could benefit by taking these elements and putting them in your pitch for any endeavor. And that is one of the elements that I wanted to focus on, like as an entrepreneur, if having a great pitch is gonna help you to fundraise the money that you need for your organization. The other element that I wanna focus and highlight that is very hard in the social sector, in the nonprofit sector, is attracting and retaining the best talent. In a nonprofit, you have limited financial resources. So you have to think of how you can create a strong intrinsic motivations to attract and retain the best talent. Of course, you cannot compete with money because many of the donors don't see this a good thing, that you pay high salaries in the nonprofit sector. That is unheard of. So you need to be creative on what are the elements that you can build in your organization to attract and retain the best talent. I have 3 tips to share with you. And one of the main ones, and I mentioned before, but I'm gonna focus more on the element of the talent, is mission and vision alignment. You need to make sure that the people that are joining your organization truly align with what you're trying to achieve. And something that the way that I usually do this is to ask them, what are the personal elements of their life, why they want to join Teach for Mexico. For me, it's so important to hear these elements, because if there is not something very strong that is calling you to do something in education, as soon as you find the challenges, and the education sector is very challenging, you're gonna run away because someone else is gonna give you a better offer money-wise, and you're gonna leave me. So I need to make sure that you are going to be in education, and you wanna be in education because of very strong personal aspects. And the second aspect is organizational culture. What is the culture that you can develop to make sure that even these people that wanna work in the nonprofit sector, in the education sector, don't go to another nonprofit because they don't feel that you're giving them what they want in your organization. And the best way to retain talent, in my aspect, is to develop this great organizational culture. And in Teach for Mexico, we focus on 4 elements. We have learned that if people are always learning, they're gonna be more engaged with your organization, and they will wanna stay there. The other aspect is the sense of possibility, allowing them to see that in Teach for Mexico together, we can go further and achieve things that might seem impossible. So making them believe that they're an important element of achieving these things that sometimes seem impossible, but they can do it if we work together. The other aspect is the sense of urgency, that we need to do it now. Like, we need them right now. We cannot wait till tomorrow. And it is very important that they give us their full energy to provide a better education and develop the community leadership that we want to develop. And the other aspect, you need to give them a sense of ownership. If people feel like they're the owners of something in your organization, they're going to develop the leadership that they need, but also they're going to be connected to your organization even more, because you're telling them you are the owner of this, and you are the one that tells me what to do. For example, with my team, with my directors, that are, some of them report to me, but for different areas, I always tell them, for example, to the development director, I tell them, you are the boss for development. I'm not your boss. You are the person that needs to tell me what to do. So for me, that is an example to give him ownership. Like, even though on paper I'm their boss, I act like their employee for whatever they ask me to do for that specific element of the organization. And I think people appreciate that a lot. And the last one is being an empathetic and humane leader. Leader is one of the elements that people are always going to be facing strong challenges. So to be able to put yourself in the shoes, to constantly ask them how you're doing, not only focus on the goals of the organization, but also telling them what is going on in your life, how can I help you, I think allows you to create that bond with people. So they're not only there for what Enseña por Mexico is trying to do, which is the mission and the vision, but also because they have developed a strong, genuine relationship with you. So those are the elements that I will share that are required to attract and retain the best talent. And I think many of them can be applicable to any sector And right now I put to you, like over here on the right, I put to you, like I have a staff of 45 people and 225 fellows, but I put the annual salary over here as a reference. So for you to know, like, I cannot compete on salaries. Like I cannot pay over hundreds of thousands of dollars to people or fellows. So this is why it's so important for me to develop the other elements to attract them and to retain them. And then the last one element which is needed once you develop a nonprofit and you start to get in big investments, in the case of Enseña por México, is donation. The people are going to ask, who are you reporting to? Like who makes sure that you're managing the resources the right way? And so this is the reason why you need to build a strong board. But at the same time, there are many other benefits that a good board can give to you. In the terms of a nonprofit, it gives a strong reputation, who you choose to be on your board. And they can help you to achieve your fundraising goals. At the same time, the board, you need to be very strategic because you need to find the elements of what is needed in your organization and find the experts out there that will be willing to give you their time to make sure that you become the best on that particular area. So that is like the way that I think about my board. Like every time if someone wants to leave the board and I'm looking for a new board member, I'm always trying to analyze what is needed at Teach for Mexico right now, organizational wise. So I can find that person that is known to be one of the best in that area, so they can help me to create this. And then the third element is the governance model. They allow you to remember one of the things that I told you that I confront in Mexico is that there is a lot of mistrust in nonprofits. So a strong board allows you to build the processes and policies that you need to make sure that people can see you as a trustworthy organization. And then the last element is more from me to the board members, is like you need to make sure that you have clear expectations with them. Like what are you expecting them to help you with? And this is something that I always do when I'm like talking to a new board member or the ones that are currently in the board. And sometimes it's intimidating because many of these individuals, in the case of Teach for Mexico, are the presidents or the CEOs of the biggest banks of Mexico, the biggest organizations in Mexico. And it's intimidating because you're coming to talk to this person that is there to help you and you're telling them, hey, I need you to help me with ABC. But it's so important to tell them and be clear of what is expected of them, and also tell them what do you expect of me, because that allows you to, again, go into the aspect of relationships, to build a very strong relationship with them. So when you are in the need of something very important, they can help you. And so that was the last element that I wanted to share. But to finish, and to open for questions and to hear like your reactions or anything, I really want to share with you one of the best tech talks for me, because of course I work in the nonprofit sector, but it's a tech talk by Dan Pallotta. And many of the ideas that he mentions, I think, are right on, because he mentioned how much difficult is to lead a nonprofit. But also the reason why we need nonprofits. Like we cannot just focus on thinking that the private sector can solve or the public sector can solve those problems. But I think I want to focus on the 5 different areas that he mentioned of why the way we think about charity or nonprofit is wrong. For example, it's like the element of compensation. We believe that a person leading a nonprofit shouldn't make, not even just leading, people working in a nonprofit shouldn't make as much money. And why is that? Why cannot just pay someone a very good salary if they're top talent and they want to work with you? The other aspect is advertising and marketing. If you do a lot of donors get bothered if you invest in marketing in nonprofit, but like how people are gonna know your brand if you're not gonna do marketing and share it? So like that is the other element that he mentioned about risk or pursuing new ideas. In many donors, they want to see the results in the short-term side, but like sometimes you want to take risks. For example, it ended up working for us, but the early childhood program was a risk that we took because we had never done it. But in the nonprofit sector, sometimes it's hard to take this risk because a lot of people are gonna want to see the results in the short term. The other aspect, the time that is required to see the results in the nonprofit, again, it relates to that point that I was just talking about, is shorter. For example, many companies in the private sector take years to become profitable, and nobody cares about that. In the nonprofit sector, people want the results right now, and you cannot take years to see the results. It is seen as a bad thing. So that's the other aspect. And the other element is profit. Like, it is a nonprofit, the name says it itself, but if you're doing profit in a nonprofit, it loses the name, but it looks very bad. But why cannot just like do it and reinvest that profit and do things? But like at the end of the day, I really recommend this talk. Is 17 minutes. And it will give you a perspective if you're thinking about leading a social organization or a nonprofit, like the elements of differences between the private sector and the nonprofit sector. And it is important that you are aware of this because it allows you to like create solutions so you can become a better nonprofit sector, even though there are many challenges out there that put you in a different bucket. But that is what I wanted to share with you with my presentation. And at the end of the day, I want to leave you with this phrase that it is our responsibility to leave the world better than we found it. The world changes with our actions. And I truly, truly hope many of the students here listening today are planning to start a nonprofit or a social organization, because we live in a world what is truly needed. There are many problems that need to be fixed now. Speaking of the sense of urgency, we cannot wait till tomorrow. Climate change, social with race issues, education issues. Please, I really hope that you come and join me in the social sector and decide to join a social organization. And thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much, sir. That was truly a very, very incredible, informative, and a mind-boggling presentation. It was really, really amazing, sir. Thank you once again.
Thank you.
So we have one of our faculty members, Professor Maheshwaran, who's been looking forward to interact with you, sir. But before I hand over the stage to Professor Maheshwaran, I would like to acknowledge the presence of our esteemed speaker, Dr. Luke Pitway. Thank you so much for joining us, sir. A very good evening.
Hello, thank you for inviting me. I look forward to presenting and hopefully having some good questions.
Sure, sir. Thank you, sir. On this note, I would like to hand over the platform to Professor Maheshwaran, sir. Sir.
Hola, estimado señor Juan Manuel González.
Hola, mucho gusto.
Perdona porque platicar en la conferencia congresa en el madrugada, pero en el México es en el madrugada, ¿sí? Y ahora en tardes, perdona. ¿Y cómo estás?
Muy bien. Muchas gracias por invitarme.
Muy bien. Primero en la introducción de mi universidad, porque hay una sorpresa que en un año hay 300 alumnos que enseñan, aprende español. Yo sé, hace 7 años enseño español por mis alumnos. Es un orgulloso en la India. Y todo el mundo gustan aprender inglés, pero en la India hay muchas personas que gustan aprender español. ¿Y por qué? Español es la lengua en el mundo en el primer lugar. Y también me gusta México porque México es un país en el mundo. Hay personas que hablan español, millones 30, ¿sí? Millones 30 hablan español. Y también le gustan que México porque yo interacción con el Instituto Cultural de Guadalajara y también Tijuana y también Durango. Y me gusta en el clubes de fútbol de Alcatranes porque es en el Scorpion en el inglés. Y también ella soy el profesor de Guillermo en Argentina. Aprende en el 3 meses y también un poquito de español, por favor. Perdona en eso. Y hay dos preguntas para usted. En primer lugar, y antes, me gusta la camiseta de sus alumnos de enseñanza de México. Maravillosa, maravillosa. Sí. En mi primera pregunta, es que tienes que decirles con mis alumnos en practicar en inglés que cómo es importante es español y que en el marca en el emprendedor en el futuro. Esta es la primera pregunta. Y otra es mi segunda y última pregunta es, ¿hace que es posible que en la interacción, en el intercambio en su país? Porque en la India no muchas personas practican español. Por mis alumnos en el futuro es el intercambio que en el platicar español es mi mucho gusto. Esas son las
Yes,
preguntas.
perfect. I'll answer in English so people understand, but thank you so much, Professor, for speaking to me in Spanish. And
Thank you, sir.
I'm glad that there are many people in India that are learning Spanish, despite that probably there are not many countries surrounding you that speak Spanish. But like one of the first questions is like that the professor wanted me to highlight is the importance as an entrepreneur to speak Spanish, to learn Spanish. The Latin American market is one of the biggest markets in the world. So if you speak Spanish, I mean, there are two main languages, of course, Spanish and Portuguese, but the one that is dominated in Latin America is Spanish. So I truly, truly recommend as an entrepreneur, is gonna give you the opportunity to grow as a business if you're keeping in mind and if you know the language. If you come to this part of the world and you wanna do business and we see that you already know the language, speaking of the aspect of trust that I was highlighting in my presentation and relationships, if people can see that you're making the effort or you know already that language, it's gonna allow you to close businesses better, like close that deal than if you don't speak it. I'm not saying that it is a requirement, but it's gonna give you an opportunity to do that. And at the same time, the other element that the professor was mentioning, I'd really hope that you find the opportunities to come and do exchange programs in Mexico, in Colombia, in any of the like many countries that we have that are Spanish speaking countries, but it will give you the perspective to learn more about our culture. And again, when you're thinking about your entrepreneurial ideas, you will have the different customer in mind, that when you're trying to enter this market, is gonna be easier for you. But like those were the two questions that we were talking for. I hope many of you were understanding Spanish, but if not, I'm here to tell you in English. Even though I have a heavy accent, I hope you can understand my English.
Thank you so much, sir. That interaction was indeed very interesting and very refreshing for all of us. So thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much, Maishwan, sir, for
Thank you, sir.
joining
Muchísimas
us.
gracias, Juan Manuel. Señor.
Gracias.
Yes, sir.
So now I would like to take a few questions from our participants, sir. We have a first question from Ms. Samita. Have you taken the teaching outcomes of students to address research gaps in the pedagogy and for mapping futuristic educational practices in Mexico?
Yeah, some of the elements that we focus, where we have done a lot of more research about the outcomes of teaching in Teach for Mexico, has focused more on the social emotional aspect. So in 2017, we did a research about what is truly happening with the students that have a Teach for Mexico fellow teaching to them versus those that didn't. And we discovered that in terms of social emotional skills, we truly are like developing better than if they do not have access to one of our fellows. And one of them that, well, we highlight 4 of them, which is like self-efficacy, self-control, growth mindset, and social consciousness. I want to focus on the aspect of self-control and growth mindset, because something that we went forward with the pandemic right now is that we did an additional study. What happened to those students that we discovered that had developed better self-control and growth mindset during the pandemic? And something that was not a surprise to us, but like it was nice to have it on paper, was that they live a pandemic with less stress, and they were completed their school work better than those that had not developed those skills. And this connects with the second element about the futuristic approaches. It shouldn't be a future because we always needed the social emotional aspect, but I think we're now making sure, and I'm seeing already in the education sector in Mexico and around the world, the importance of the social emotional aspect. That before we care so much about making sure that the students got perfect grades in math, in English, in all the required subjects, but now we're focusing on making sure that there is a focus on well-being and developing the social emotional skills. So for me, that was one of the elements where we took the outcomes of what we were doing in the teaching field, and now thinking what we can connect it with something that is needed in the future and in everywhere. Like, think of all of you, how hard it is to live in this pandemic, and how important has been to think about self-control. How do you control those emotions so you don't consume them and you can focus on what you're doing? So I think it's something that is required. And unfortunately, I do believe that we're gonna continue to face more crises in the world. So we need to prepare students with those social emotional skills so they are prepared to confront these crises and challenges.
Well, sir, thank you so much for articulating it so well. And, you really answered the question in a way that all of us could understand. So the next question that I would like to take is from Mr. Gyanesh. How do you get rid of distractions, as it is turning out to be a major hindrance in achieving your goal?
It is like, I think you have to have, you first, and it connects with any entrepreneur. I do believe that the best entrepreneurs that I have known, you truly need to have a clear vision of what you want to achieve. And if you truly believe and have a clear vision of like this thing that you want to achieve, these challenges that are going to confront are going to be just that, challenges. They're going to be distractions, but you already know what is the end point of where you want to get. And that is one of the elements. And the other aspect that I truly believe is that personal aspect. The reason why I continue in the education sector, even though I can tell you it's way harder than being a management consultant. I used to think that being a consultant was hard. It is not. It is so much harder to be working in the education sector where resources are limited and you are trying to accomplish. So you need to have this element, in my case for me in education, that truly connects with that vision that you want to achieve. I truly think of my mother every time because she didn't have the opportunity to learn to read and write for me. So that is the personal connection that if I don't continue to achieve that vision, I'm letting down a lot of people like my mother, that not because they didn't want to get access to education, they just didn't have the opportunity to have that access to education. So having that personal element that pushes you to go further is very important. So vision and having a personal connection with that vision are the elements that are needed to avoid those distractions.
Well, sir, thank you for again making it so easy for us to connect. And it was a we all could connect with the way you answered, sir. The last question for the session, sir. It was by Ms. Mule. What are the key challenges that social entrepreneurs encounter in developing countries, as many of those startups end up failing? What do you recommend, and what should the relationship with the stakeholders be?
So one of the main challenges, I think, it has to do with we have to change mindsets of people, and that is the hardest thing to do. And I think that is where I connected with the TED Talk that I put in the last slide that I presented. It is you confront the challenge of like changing the mindset of people of the results that you need to achieve. You need to achieve in the short-term things, results that are required by your investors and donors. But at the same time, if you want to survive, you always want to have a long-term vision. So always making sure that, because many of them, like you mentioned, are going to fail, because I think their problem was that they're always focused on the short term to fulfill what the mindset was telling them, what are these results in the short term. But if you're not thinking in the long term, as soon as a crisis like a pandemic shows up, or like a better social entrepreneur shows up, they're gonna push you to the side and they're gonna replace you with a cooler idea that they saw and you didn't see because you were focusing in the short term. So like for me, is the importance of achieving those short-term results that are needed because the market is asking for those and the culture is asking for those, but not losing the long-term vision and always thinking what is the next innovation here that I can do and how can I start it to make sure that when these short-term results that I'm achieving are no longer enough, I can move on to the next thing. So that's one of the things that I will say. And the reason you don't survive is it has to do with that. Like having a short-term vision will in any sector will kick you out of the market.
Very well said, sir. Yes, sir. So thank you so much for clarifying our participants' queries through your in-depth knowledge, sir. Thank you once again. And this session was absolutely
so much.
mind-blowing. Thank you, sir. And I would like to hand over the platform to Professor Baishakhi.
Thank you, Dr. Abhishek.
Thank you, Joanne.
Thank you,
Joanne. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Joanne. Thank you so much.
So, on this note, I would like to invite Dr. Rupa KV to introduce our next illustrious speaker of the session. Over to Dr. Rupa.
Thank you, Professor Baishakhi. With immense respect and gratitude, I feel honored to take this privilege to welcome our next speaker of the session, Dr. Luke Pitave. Dr. Pitave is an Associate Dean in the College of Business and Oberl's Professor of Entrepreneurship. He is an expert on entrepreneurial behavior, networking, entrepreneurial failure, business growth, and corporate venturing. Pitave's research focuses on entrepreneurship education and learning. In 2018, he was awarded USB's Entrepreneurship Educator of the Year. That research is beneficial to his students as it informs the design and development of the classes he teaches in various ways. Pitave is not only making an impact in the classroom, but is also working outside the classroom to provide opportunities for students through the Center for Entrepreneurship. The center has expanded opportunities for entrepreneurship education by implementing major and certificate programs which are available to all students on campus. He has also increased extracurricular options by including open events and establishing new clubs such as the Social Entrepreneurship Club and Actus. An academic entrepreneur, Pitave helped found and lead 3 centers for entrepreneurial research and education: the Institute for Entrepreneurship and Enterprise Development at Lancaster University, UK, the Center for Regional Economic and Enterprise Development at the University of Sheffield, UK, and Georgia Southern University's Center for Entrepreneurial Learning and Leadership. Prior to Ohio, Pitave served as the William A. Freeman Distinguished Chair in Free Enterprise and the Director of Central for Entrepreneurial Learning and Leadership at Georgia Southern University, managing entrepreneurship programs. He also served on the faculty at Lancaster University, considered one of the top 5 business schools in the United Kingdom. While there, he completed a funded research project for Economic and Social Research Council's Advanced Institute for Management. As a research coordinator, Pitaway successfully expanded the Business Development Unit into a research-led institute. A former research and education fellow with the United Kingdom's National Council on Graduate Entrepreneurship and Advanced Institute of Management Research Scholar, Pitaway sits on a number of editorial boards, including the International Small Business Journal. Dr. Pitaway collaborates with the UPS Store's annual Small Business Survey, providing expert advice and interpretation of data for the media. Dear sir, it gives us immense pleasure to welcome you to deliver your talk on Theories of Entrepreneurial Opportunities and Their Impact in Ideation Techniques. Over to you, sir.
Well, thank you very much. That was very kind introduction. And you have things there. I mean, I've obviously been in the UK and now in the US as a professor of entrepreneurship, and have been involved in lots of different things. And some of those things I've completely forgotten. So thank you very much for that very wonderful introduction. So I have slightly changed tack in terms of my presentation. I'm going to share my screen and just quickly while we get going. So let me start. Okay, so you should see my screen.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so is there everything okay? You can see well?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yes.
Okay, so I did write a book chapter on oh, what have I done? Is everything okay? Oh, I don't want to stop. Okay, something's gone wrong here. Just bear with me for a second. I'll just try sharing again here. Let's try again. I've got the subtitles on. Does anybody know how to turn that off? It's a bit distracting watching myself. No. Okay, I'll just start. Okay, so basically, my original talk was to be about ideation and ideation techniques, and I changed up my focus a little bit. The chapter that I've written is actually available, and if anybody is interested in that particular topic, I can share that with you. So I've written a couple of pieces of work just recently about physical space in entrepreneurship education. I wanted to share that with you. I think it's an important topic, and it's something that is actually under researched right now. So we're going to be talking about the role of physical space in entrepreneurship education. And basically, I'm going to talk about the two papers that I have actually written and talk about those briefly so that you can have those references. And then we will look at the object and the story of the work itself. So there was a kind of rationale for why we were engaged in looking at physical space, and I want to sort of talk through that. We will look at the methods involved in the study. I'm going to talk a little bit about the literature in creativity and innovation and how it informs the way in which we engage and look at the role of physical space in educational practices and specifically in entrepreneurship education. Then I'm going to present a typology of different spaces that we see typically here in the US, and talk through the forms and space and the type of innovation that different types of spaces are trying to create, and then present a process model of the creation of new spaces, so that if you are looking at the creation of an entrepreneurship space, you can start to use this process model as a practical kind of method for doing that. And I should provide plenty of time for questions. I'm aiming at about 25 to 30 minutes in terms of my presentation. So here's the published work. There are two papers out that you can get hold of that are already available. The first one is University Spaces for Entrepreneurship, a Process Model, and that is in the International Journal of Entrepreneurial Behavior and Research. That's the main piece of work that we have published on this particular topic. And then the second topic. The second paper is on spaces for entrepreneurship education, a new campus arms race, and that's in Annals of Entrepreneurship Education. It's more of a book chapter that just takes forward some of the things. You know how it is when you write research, sometimes you have to remove certain things, and you have to kind of present only certain components of the work. And so this was kind of like almost like a secondary component, just to talk about the value of this particular area and some of the things that we were highlighting. And specifically in that paper, we looked at why entrepreneurship education was really not focused on the role of space. So if you think about educational practices, the classrooms that you're in, the physical space that you use, those are all really important things in the educational practices. And if you're trying to innovate in educational pedagogy, you know, if you're in a traditional classroom, that can be problematic. And so starting to think about the role of the design of physical space and classrooms and other facilities in order to support entrepreneurship education became something that was clearly under-researched, and something that we actually need to think a lot more about if we're really going to innovate in educational practice. I just want to check everybody can hear me okay? So, are we good?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Okay, excellent. Okay, so I just want to give a few of the trends in entrepreneurship education research just quickly, so you get a sense of why this topic is important. So, you know, what we've seen is a movement away from focusing on venture creation to also focusing on entrepreneurial mindsets. So, you know, we had that, the previous speaker was just talking about some certain things that we were looking at, where we could see that we were actually engaged in the role of mindsets. How do we actually change people's mindsets? How do we develop mindsets? How do we encourage them to be more entrepreneurial in a social context? And so entrepreneurship education has moved away from simply talking about the venture creation process to much more focused on the mindsets and the way in which we you know, encourage people to engage in just generally being more entrepreneurial, regardless of the context within which they operate. So the second kind of thing that's happening is there's a desire to kind of innovate in pedagogy. So when we talk about educational practice, we often think about types of learning that we're sat there, we're talking, you know, the professor is basically lecturing the students, and that's what we would call about forms of educational practice. We're engaged in trying to really kind of transfer knowledge and to share that knowledge with people. But entrepreneurship education has kind of progressed into really trying to engage people in building up skills and competencies for actually engaging in practice by doing things through and for. So this is where you may do a venture planning course, or you may do an actual startup in the classroom, something that is actually engaging the establishment of entrepreneurial actual skills. And then finally, we have an embedded approach where university-wide entrepreneurship programs are getting off the ground, and we're starting to embed entrepreneurship in different disciplines. And so if you're trying to embed entrepreneurship education in, say, chemistry or biology or physics, what does that look like, and how do you go about doing that? And so educational practices have really kind of changed in order to recognize that you need to embed entrepreneurship in disciplines that already exist. The other thing, I mean, obviously this international conference is a good example of this. Entrepreneurship education is spreading worldwide. It started off, in the 50s in the US, and it's expanded in the 70s and 80s in many countries in Europe and in the US itself. And, obviously in many countries now, entrepreneurship education policy is driving universities towards the establishment of entrepreneurship programs, of centers, of building up all sorts of different things in the ecosystem to support universities to be engaged in training the next generation of people to be much more entrepreneurial. We also see a spread of entrepreneurship programs across campus. And so what we're seeing, this is something that we were seeing in Sheffield. We would be embedding entrepreneurship in lots of different programs across campus. The problem then is, how do we get the students to actually meet each other? What are we doing to engage educational practice in such a way that these students that are trying to do things together from engineering and business and from chemistry, from art, from sculpture, how do they actually meet? How do they engage in something that's going to be valuable from a practical point of view And often spaces are coming up as the solution to that problem. That, you know, we have students and professors doing entrepreneurship all over campus, but they're never really interacting. So let's create a physical space in the center of campus in order to encourage the development of interactions between these students, so we can actually engage in real venture creation processes. And then obviously you're also seeing the spread of entrepreneurship education across the education system. So in European countries in particular, but also in other countries, you start to see entrepreneurship being offered at primary school level, at secondary school level. And so there's this spread not only at the collegiate level, but also within other levels of the institution. Okay, so when we move to the US context, we start to see some really interesting developments, and I'm going to talk about these in terms of physical space. And so there's this quote from the New York Times, 2016, that, where once the campus immunities arms race was waged over luxury dorms and recreational facilities, now colleges and universities are building deluxe structures for the generation of wonderful ideas. They and their partners in industry are pouring millions into new buildings for business, engineering, and applied learning that closely resemble the high-tech workplace, itself inspired by the minimally partitioned spaces of the garage and the factory. So the point here, the New York Times did an article on this, is that universities in the US are spending enormous amounts of money on building physical space to support innovation and entrepreneurship. So this is serious donor dollars, it's serious investment from the universities themselves. And it's a real phenomenon that's going on here. Now, not all countries can spend ridiculous amounts of money on physical space for entrepreneurship, but this is a trend that's clearly happening in the US. And often what happens in the US tends to have an impact on entrepreneurship education programs in other countries. And so we're going to talk about that a little bit. So here's some of the things that are happening. So Cornell University is building a 12-acre technology campus in Roosevelt Island in the center of New York, in the city of New York itself. I think most of you will know Cornell is actually in upstate New York. Utah University of Utah, has built a $45 million La Sonde Studios, which is a dorm designed to support entrepreneurship. We have York University, which is actually in Canada. There's a $25 million investment in a brand new school of engineering that is rethinking how engineering education occurs in order to support entrepreneurial practice. We have the University of Iowa's Arts School, which is again focused on the art schools and redesigning an art school to support entrepreneurship education. And then we have Wichita State University, which is building an innovation campus as well, very similar to what Cornell has done. So when you start to look at these spaces, you start to see some things happening. There's certain different types of spaces being built. The first one's what we call innovation dorms. There's not a lot of those right now. I know of about 5 or 6 cases in the US of a dorm that is a student residence that has all the things that you'd expect to see for a student dorm, that also has the entrepreneurship center, the physical space, maker spaces, it has meeting spaces for students to meet with entrepreneurs, it has all sorts of facilities built into it, not only for residential purposes, but also to be the focal point for entrepreneurship on campus, but actually in a residential space in a dorm. Then you have what we call student accelerators and incubators. Here we have a large number of programs that are really designed to launch new ventures amongst the students or recent graduates or local entrepreneurs. Then they're really more focused on the student side and not on the academic side. So we have incubators and all sorts of other things. I'm sure many universities in India have this, where you have incubators to help academic entrepreneurship, but these are student incubators. These are designed for students, for recent graduates who are trying to launch new ventures, to help them actually do that. And they come in a number of forms. We have sort of what I would call pre-incubators, incubators, and accelerator programs. So very different forms of activity. But then you have what we would call fab labs and maker spaces. So these are prototyping facilities designed to help students take their initial idea in a venture and what we call materialize it. So this is build a prototype, build something that is uniquely different, that will demonstrate their particular thing. So you see some pictures there for maker spaces and fab labs. And then finally, we're seeing mixed use facilities. So these are facilities that usually locate the Center for Entrepreneurship, the Institute for Entrepreneurship, that are really designed to support this facility that is really mixed use. So we have teaching spaces in there, you might have fab labs in there, you might have a whole range of different spaces in that particular facility in order to ensure that we are engaging all aspects of entrepreneurship on a campus in the one space. And sometimes these, I'll talk about these a little bit more, sometimes these are hubs where it's one space, sometimes they're hubs with bridges, so a hub with lots of other spaces on spread across campus. So this is the topic that we were interested in, and I'll explain why we were interested in it. So this is what we were doing. We were building a space ourselves in the library. So we have built a $1 million project, it was, in the library, third floor of our library. I'm actually stood in it right now. This is where I am located now. And you'll see that we had a student team involved. We have a number of female students, and they decided pink was a good color. And it was really fascinating to see that, because we have corporate colors. Our corporate colors are different shades of green. So they managed to break the university's kind of expectations on that. So this space, you see a few pictures here. It's difficult to really show what the space is like on these pictures, but just give you a sense. We have a maker space, which is the light green. We have ideation spaces, which are the dark greens. We have an incubation, pre-incubation space for student entrepreneurs, which is the pink. We have the Center for the Entrepreneurship, which is the purple. And then we have a large meeting room, which is the orange. And then the blue space is an event space, and when it's not being used for events is open for teams and lots of sort of mobile usage of different things. And then there's a classroom. So the gray square at the top is a classroom that has been set up for all the entrepreneurship classes, are basically, or the innovation, ideation, innovation classes are in that space there. So, for us, we're like, well, we want to build a space. We're gonna do this. This is now done. It's 2 years. Well, actually, it's probably 4 years since we started this process, and we now have built it and it's operating, and lots of students are using it. But in order to really kind of do that, we're like, well, we really need to know how to actually build a space like this. What does it take to do this well? So we had to do research. I think, as academics, you kind of like, well, we can't just go and build a space and spend $1 million and change change half a floor of the library and not know what we're actually doing it for. So this is a mixed methods kind of action research. So we were using lots of different sets of methods. We wanted to engage in actually building out the space and changing the space as we went along, but we also wanted to kind of figure out, this is actually research while we're doing it. So we have to keep information while we're doing it. Lots of different methods were involved. So we studied 57 different spaces in the US. So there are lots of physical spaces already built in US universities. So we went and had a look at those. We did market analysis of our own students to try to figure out what our students wanted from a space. We identified best practice innovation entrepreneurship spaces and sent a group of faculty and students to go visit those spaces. Which unfortunately I didn't get to do, which is a bit, it was a shame really, because that would have been a fun thing to have to do. We did a second stage of those 57 entrepreneurship spaces, go deeper into what it is they were actually doing. And then finally, we interviewed people that were running these spaces in different universities. So just basically a range of different methods to get a really good sense of what it is that these spaces are doing. So I just want to present a model. So this is our model. I'm hoping you can see that okay. Given the way things are presenting. So we basically, when you talk about innovation, you start to see lots of different things going on. The biggest challenge we found with this, when we're doing this work, is there's really very little literature on the role of physical space in education. You go and look at it and you'll find that there's a lot less than you would think on the role of physical space. In entrepreneurship education research, there's nothing. There's just the 2 papers that we've just published. There is nothing on the role of physical space. Now, there are research papers on co-working spaces and on incubators, on some of the things that are to one side, but actually specifically looking at educational space and its role in educational practice is very under-researched. And so we have to go to the innovation, architecture, creativity literature to really start to understand this. And even in the architectural literature, you think there'd be a lot. And there wasn't very much. There's some papers in creativity, there's some papers in innovation. It seems like a lot of the practice here is in the professional domain, within professional architect practices that are sharing their practices. So anyway, we managed to find literature, and that's in the paper. And what we basically were able to identify is this model. So there are different forms of innovation going on. You have cognitive forms of innovation. So this is the stuff that's to you personally, your ideas, the things that you are really focused on. Then you have social forms of innovation. So social forms are requiring you to interact with other people, standing around, brainstorming, doing ideation techniques, thinking about stuff, really trying to create stuff through working with other people. Then you have to have supporting things. So there's programming that needs to be in place. There's configuration of the space that needs to be in place. So these are supporting forms of innovation. And I think uniquely to entrepreneurship education is the materialization component. So the materialization component is these makerspaces. It's taking the ideas and turning it into reality. It's doing something with it. It's actually building prototypes. It's building out your minimum viable product. It's doing the things that actually take the idea from something that's simply an idea to something that is actually going to happen. So what we see is these different issues, I'm going to talk through each of these individually, that guide why or how space should be designed. So the first one is configuration. So configuration is really about how you lay out the space. So you work into a typical university building, you'll find that it still follows the dark ages design of little cells for professors along a long corridor. So if you're working in a university that has a long corridors and lots of little rooms for your professors to be in, you're still about 400 years out of date, I think. So that is a typical kind of like design. Whereas when we start to think about innovation, we start to say, well, actually, that doesn't work very well. So what really starts to work is actually having communal space. It requires having private space that circulates the central space, and the central space needs to be where the open plan activities happen. So there's a lot more focus on the design, setup, flow, and organization of space. So how space is adjacent to each other. Focus on the role of communal space and access to communal space, making sure that you're more open plan, but not totally open plan. And we'll come back to that. Having flat structures, removing walls, reducing corridors. Typically circular and radial designs, configurations are considered to be more effective for creativity and innovation. So this is circular, or having things radiating from a central hub. Having flow of space so that you can encourage serendipity. So you're talking about the role of serendipity in entrepreneurship. It's like you accidentally meet somebody and you accidentally get an opportunity to come up with a new idea because you've come up with something that you wouldn't have done if you hadn't met that person. So you can design serendipity into space, and a good architect will actually design spaces where if you're moving between two spaces, you have the chance that you might meet people accidentally. And then this idea of mixed configuration. So you have some formal space, but you also have a lot of informal space, and you have deliberate design to have flow from the informal to the formal and from the formal to the informal. So how you configure the space is really important. The next one is biophilia. So biophilia is really all about the role of the external environment. So apparently, and I think this is true, we're much more innovative if we have connection with the outside world. So when you're designing a space, actually thinking about the role of the natural environment in the space becomes important if you want to encourage innovation. So that means like, humans interconnectedness with their natural environment becomes important. Maximizing natural environment in the design, having lots of plants and all sorts of different things there. Using natural materials, having wood and having different materials that are more natural and less manufactured, maximizing natural light and natural views, and enhancing the visual and tactile stimuli. So there are things that you can touch and see and feel that are connections to the outside world. Becomes important if you're looking to enhance innovation space. Sociopetal is the next one that's also clearly an important factor in encouraging innovation. Here we're talking about the design to make it human-centric so that you can encourage interaction, collaboration, cooperation. So you're really trying to make sure the space is actually doing things that's encouraging people to interact and to collaborate, to ideate, to sit down, to talk, to interact, all the things that we're not doing at the moment with COVID, unfortunately. All the things that you probably feel most uncomfortable with right now because of COVID, are all the things that innovation is telling us we should be doing if we want to encourage a space that encourages innovation. So in this type of space, it also needs to be flexible. It needs to be able to reconfigure it, move it around, have different configurations, do different things, have a meeting of 2 people or a meeting of 10 people. You need a range of forms that interact with building design. So, you know, it's recognizing that space will be used for different purposes, that you are encouraging interaction, avoiding, you know, somebody kind of just going in a space and owning it and saying, oh, you know, this space over here is just an office that only the professor can use. Or this space over here is going to, you know, one person goes in it, it's a meeting room, they close the door and they don't allow anybody else to use it. So creating modifiability so that you can change things around. The lighting, the walls, the seating, the layout can be changed. And that you bring in symbols that highlight to users that they are allowed to modify the space. Materialization, we've sort of talked about a little bit, but this is the idea of transforming the ideas into a material thing. So actually producing something. So this requires space that is going to be collaborative. So you can take from the initial idea to a team-based ideation. It requires gestation space so that you actually do have quiet space to think, to reflect, to learn. And this is one of the things we learned from a lot of the spaces we looked at. They were missing out on the idea gestation piece. It's like you do need individual space and you do need quiet space. A lot of these spaces are open plan and you don't have very much kind of quiet space. And so it's not really that conducive to innovation because you don't have ideation gestation. And engages in materialization of sensory experiences. So this is where you're able to build prototypes, build models, build designs, do pictures. You know, it's enabled, the ability to build something is enabled in the space. Another thing that kind of comes across quite strongly is these spaces typically kind of tell the user that you're supposed to be being innovative, and the role of technology becomes important. So how technology is incorporated into the space gives signals to users that, oh, actually, you're supposed to be being innovative in this space. So all sorts of things kind of come up here. You know, obviously at the moment, you know, being able to have remote meetings in the space and bring people in from the outside into the space is going to be important. Being able to have certain technologies that indicate to everybody that this space is actually designed to be innovative, to be smart, to be clever. Interesting, I put here, but this is really, you know, to do with, you know, the aesthetics of the space. So how do you, creative space is interesting space. So how do you bring in, you know, complex spatial forms, ornamental attractions, shapes, visual things that make people want to actually engage with the space? You know, how do you do that? What are the sculptures? What are the structures? What the interior design is designed to symbolize this space? And then finally, symbolism. So we're talking about innovative space that actually provides value and meaning. You might see all the logos of all the entrepreneurial businesses that have been created from the space. You might see the values and missions slammed all over the wall saying, hey, you need to be innovative. It's symbolizing to the user that stories in the space, that stories about the innovation of the university, how the space is defined to encourage the user to actually use it. And then finally, a space isn't any good if it doesn't have effective programming. So it's all very well, you know, this happens a lot in the UK. You build these spaces that are really designed to be kind of innovative, but then if there's no programming to encourage people to be innovative, there's no, you know, there's no clubs, there's no organizations, there's no accelerator program, there's no incubator program. If the programs aren't there, then the space isn't going to encourage innovation. So it's all very well having a built space, but if you don't actually have programming that's designed to effectively create that space, create innovation or assist innovation in the space, then you may as well forget it in terms of what you're doing. So we take all these things, these areas, and we look at the different types of space, and we map them against the model, which is presented in this one. And what you basically see is a typology. So you've got spaces that are designed to create idea gestation. So these are obviously much more on the cognitive side of innovation. You have idea sharing spaces. These are clearly much more on the social side of innovation. You have incubators and accelerators. And as I said, incubators and accelerators are pre-incubators, incubators and accelerators are all different. And so they do slightly different things depending on the specific type of number two. So there's three different forms of space there. Materialization spaces obviously are designed to create materialization space. And then we see several different forms of integrated space. So you've got integrated space, which is mixed use. That's usually the focal point for the Center for Entrepreneurship or the institute that's designed to do lots of different things. You have integrated space that is trying to connect things across campus. So you've got a big campus, you've got lots of prototyping labs in different locations. This is a bridge or a hub that is designed to connect these things together and become the organizing function for the entire ecosystem on the campus. And then finally, you have these dorms, which are fairly new, I would say, as we talked about. There's probably only about 5 or 6 of these in the US right now. So then you end up with a process model. So if you want to create a space like this, what do you do? I mean, what did we follow when we tried to do this? So the first thing that seems important is, what is it that you're actually trying to do? Why are you doing the space? So as you can see, there's all these different forms. We talk about entrepreneurship education, and we would really like a space to focus our entrepreneurship education efforts. But what is the objective of that particular space? Is it idea gestation? Is it venture creation? Is it a mixed use space for the Center for Entrepreneurship, so all the teaching stuff could be in one place? Is it designed to integrate to allow students and academics to meet from across campus who are doing different things in order to learn from each other? Or is it designed to engage the community in the university? So the objectives of the space really influence, obviously, what you end up doing. The target audience, who are you doing it for? I mean, over here, a lot of these spaces are created because we have donors, and the donors want to contribute. And so, they talk to the donor, find out what the donor wants, and then build the space. Obviously, you want to find out who's going to use it, why they're going to use it, and ensure that the space is actually effective. You can go to some of these universities, spend millions of dollars building physical space for entrepreneurship, and it's completely not being used. There were several places we went, it's like, why isn't anybody using this? Well, we built it on the wrong place on campus, or we didn't really think about why students wanted it and how they were going to use it enough, and so they're not using it in the way we thought they would. Obviously, it is important to assess performance. You wouldn't believe how many of these places do not have metrics to judge whether or not they've been successful. They're spending $40, $50 million in some cases, and there's no real metrics in place to say, well, what does performance look like? How do we measure whether or not this has actually been successful? Obviously, what type of space? We've illustrated here that there are very different forms of spaces. Some universities have multiple forms of entrepreneurship education spaces, but what is it designed to do? Why are you doing it? And then ultimately, what type of space do you actually need in order to achieve that? The operating hours became important. We added this when we went through the process. You will find that the students want to work at 12 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning. And so, we often, a lot of places have had like, well, we can only open it 9 to 5. We have to man this. There has to be somebody there. Well, it's no good because, in actual fact, the students want to use it in the evening. So for example, if you want a space that's engaging your community, the very edge of campus is better with parking, typically, in at least the US. Whereas if you're trying to do a hub that's trying to integrate student engagement, you actually want to do it right in the center of campus, in our case, right in the library where the students are. So what you're trying to do really dictates where you put it on the campus. And then finally, how are you actually going to do it? I mean, obviously the US has a lot more money than many countries and is spending significant, money on some of these things. But I've worked with universities in Hungary and other countries where they're designing entrepreneurship education space on a pretty limited budget, but it's still possible, and I don't know if, I didn't put up MIT, but a lot of this links back to MIT, and when MIT, a lot of entrepreneurial ventures came out of MIT, and they were in a particular building, which was really horrible. But the building had a particular layout that encouraged, academics that were doing interesting research to collaborate. And so they ended up with a lot of venture creation because they had this building that was encouraging it. And so, it wasn't a particularly expensive building. It was eventually they ripped it down. I think it was building 15 or something like that. But anyway, the point I'm trying to make is that you don't have to spend millions of dollars to build a space for entrepreneurship education that is effective. It can be done on a shoestring budget if you need to. You just have to think carefully about it. Okay, I'm going to stop there. This is the paper. I'm going to stop sharing. Hopefully I've left enough time for questions.
Well, sir, thank you so much. That was very, very informative, interesting, and we got to learn so much that we hadn't really did come across, sir. Thank you so much for that enlightening and amazing session. Let's take a few questions, sir. Sir, our first question is from Ms. Pinu. How did COVID-19 challenge your understanding of physical spaces, and how did you transit into the cyberspace that we are living today?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I think, you know, we were slightly anticipating that with our efforts here, in the sense that, you know, when we were building our space, we were thinking about, you know, we're in a rural area in the middle of nowhere. So I should have said that before, in Appalachia, Ohio. And so when we're trying to bring in entrepreneurs, you know, there isn't a lot of entrepreneurs in our community. We have a lot of alumni entrepreneurs that are very successful, that live elsewhere. So a lot of our space was designed for bringing in people from the outside. So we have you can see here, every single classroom, every single space is set up to be able to do teams. And so, you know, we had a period where the university was closed down and wasn't having students on campus, but that was shorter than in many places. And so, you know, obviously as students are using the space here, you know, they're able to bring in people from the outside. So, I mean, for example, I'm using the classroom right now. We're actually in classes. We have physical presence in classes, but we also have students that are on COVID protocols that can't attend classes, and we have professors that can't be there. So we still have the ability to do hybrid effectively in all the rooms. So that's helped a lot. I would definitely encourage that going forward. I mean, if you're going to do a space, recognize that this is the future, that we're either going to be doing a lot more remote or a lot more hybrid. Obviously, we closed the space for, you know, a period of time. I mean, it was closed. The whole campus was closed for a year, and we had to lay off our program manager. So I'm not pretending there wasn't any effect, and we predicted everything. But yeah, clearly thinking about how. I mean, for me, the big question here, that, you know, to answer that question, the big question is that how do you take some of these principles and apply them in a virtual format? Because some of these things you can't replicate in a virtual format. We lose a lot of things when we go virtual. And so, you know, we've done some great things, but, you know, how do you encourage serendipity in a virtual environment, for example? I think that's really hard. And so we've lost a lot of things when we've gone entirely virtual that we have to probably recover when we get beyond the pandemic, or try to find ways that the virtual can still manage to do some of those things. Because you can't, wander down a physical space and just bump into somebody and have a conversation, sit down, have a coffee, and then end up with a new member of your team that you're going to launch a business with. You can't do that in the virtual. So we're all isolated. We don't have those opportunities anymore. That for me would be a pretty big barrier to future innovation.
Well, sir, that was really well articulated, and it has been explained so well that I think we really understood on how to deal with this. Sir, our next question is from Dr. Ramakrishnan. He says that it's a dream for many institutions to utilize the physical space to the maximum, but many a times, and especially the government sectors, they are not able to manage the space, considering the infrastructural issues, and they're not able to actually cater to everything that the space requirements are. So how do we change the mindset of the provider as well as the ones who are utilizing the space?
I think we need to do much more of this kind of research and think about it a lot more. So, for example, yeah, we still have a massive legacy in our campus. We have many classrooms that are fixed lecture theatres, and yet the pedagogy for the campus has changed quite a lot. I mean, we have a lot of problem-based learning. It's not just entrepreneurship. It's many of our disciplines are doing different things, and so our physical space does not really support the type of learning that we're doing anymore, and obviously it costs a lot of money to fix that problem. So I think the first thing is, like, we have to talk about it a lot more. It's like, is this classroom actually doing what it should be doing for the types of learning that we are actually doing in this classroom? Can we, and I also think that, obviously universities in the US are throwing a lot of money at this. I don't know that partly because it attracts donors. The donors are interested in doing this. They like to do this kind of thing. But I don't know that you need to spend a lot of money on it either. Some of these spaces like, hey, we've got a spare room that's not really being used very much. It's kind of grotty. Let's rethink what we're doing with it. So I think you can do this on a shoestring if you think carefully about it. And I think being deliberate about the issue of how space influences the way in which we teach. So, for example, I know I do ideation classes, I do business plan classes, I'm doing consultancy classes. All of our stuff is in types of learning that really, I mean, if you get unfortunate enough to be given by your head department the tiered lecture theatre and you're trying to do ideation, you've got a real problem. So also mapping, being more careful about the allocation space to the type of learning that's going on, I think is also important, given that we can't just blow up entire universities and redesign everything.
Wow. Thank you, sir. Again, that was articulated very well. Sir, next question is from Pratik. He says, because of COVID, people are mostly interacting indoors and working indoors, and this is going to impact networking in the long run. So how do we deal with this problem, sir? Yeah, I think we have to. I mean, hopefully we'll get out of doing that eventually. It's a temporary thing. Maybe we're seeing it here. We're starting to have more, get out of the virtual and get out of being at home. But many of our universities' cultures have been impacted. So even today when we have our students back on campus, we're not social distancing in the classes anymore. But the faculty have not come back. The faculty are struggling to come back. So I think there are cultural issues that will take time to get beyond. I certainly think there are online mechanisms for networking. So for example, in the US, we've got some pretty sophisticated business angel networks that are purely online now. There are methodologies that you can use that can address that problem that are virtual. But I honestly believe that it's kind of hard to fully address it. And I also think, like, we're all sat in our rooms, staying in houses, not wanting to go out. And oh, by the way, biophilia is kind of important to innovation. So if biophilia is important to innovation, if we're all stuck in our own houses and we're not getting much interaction with the outdoors, we might have a problem, in terms of what that might mean for innovation going forward. Wow. Thank you, sir, again. Our next question from a participant is, how business incubators help startups in entrepreneurial development?
Yeah, I mean, that really depends. So, when we're talking about entrepreneurship education on campuses, we've got pre-incubators. So these are spaces that are really, trying to bring teams together and do the early stage kind of development of an idea. Then you've got incubators, which are much more established. Like, okay, the businesses are formed, they're legal entities, they're actually engaged in trying to really launch the businesses much further along the road. And then you've got accelerator programs, which are much more intensive. Accelerators are much more engaged with actually trying to help people actually launch the businesses, are often supported by venture capital companies. And so I think it really does, first of all, it depends what type of thing you're trying to do. There's 3 different things there. And then secondly, and there's lots of models. We have an incubator here for our campus, and there's, most national organizations, most nations have, incubator associations, which share best practices about how to do incubation. And obviously there's lots of things that the programming does matter, the space does matter. It does matter to make sure that you're actually graduating people and you kick them out so that you can create more space for the next set of entrepreneurs. How well you network in your community to find the opportunities to attract them to come and use the incubator, the quality of the people that are running the incubator, whether or not they've got entrepreneurial experience, whether they've got entrepreneurs in residence, connection to venture capital, connection to other financing. So a lot of factors there, but you can find, like, certainly there's the, I think it's the US Business Incubator Association. They produce quite regularly best practice reports on how to do incubation. So that's a website worth checking. There's probably a report you can download that says, hey, this is what the best practice is for incubation for the more formal incubators.
Well, thank you, sir. I think that was very, very informative and to be very crisp and precise. So another question from a participant. How does recovering economies, pretty much in the African countries, utilize entrepreneurship education to become successful?
Yeah, I think they have to, and as all countries have to. So I think one of the challenges is, and I think this is a challenge I see in entrepreneurship education, in many countries. So, you know, the US is a bit different because we've got a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of successful people that then, you know, have become philanthropic and then they give their money back to programs to encourage entrepreneurship. So it's a very bottom-up kind of approach. There isn't a lot of public policy here to support entrepreneurship education. It's just happened here. Whereas you go to Europe, most European countries, yeah, the government has said, oh, we need to make people more entrepreneurial. So we're going to have educational practice to encourage the society to be more entrepreneurial from a cultural point of view. That way we'll get more entrepreneurs. Well, that only takes you so far though, because if you haven't got the institutional environment, if you haven't got the money, if you haven't got the support infrastructure, you haven't got the ability, you know, if you've got corruption or you've got problems in the society that make it difficult for entrepreneurs to be successful, doesn't matter how much entrepreneurship education you've got, you may still not be very successful. So I do get a little bit concerned when I see a number of countries like saying, oh, we're gonna have entrepreneurship education and then that's going to fix the problem. And then a few years later they say, well, why haven't we got more entrepreneurs? I think you also have to recognize the institutional environment plays a role. So yes, it's really, really important for developing countries to start to educate people how to be successful entrepreneurs. And if you look at some of the stats, many of those countries have more entrepreneurs than developed countries anyway, because many more people are self-employed. They're trying, and they've got grit. There's people really want to start businesses. They really want to do cool stuff. And you know, there is a real determination in many of those countries to have successful entrepreneurship. But you as a country, you have to be careful not to ignore the institutional issues. It's like, if it takes me 5 years to legally form my business, which it doesn't anywhere these days, but you know, a few years ago, France, it used to take like 18 months to start a business to actually legally form the business. That's a big barrier, and that's going to cause me a problem. If there's no money or to help me, you know, even a little seed capital grant or a microfinance in order to just have that little bit of extra money that I need to get started, then that's going to be a barrier. So I think we have to. We have to be careful to think that entrepreneurship education is a panacea, and I worry about that a little bit because we're all in this and we all love entrepreneurship education. But I don't think it fixes all the problems for a society. I think societies have to recognise that their institutional fabric really does play a role in whether or not you know, they can act. You know, if people are really trying to be entrepreneurial, how can they actually make it happen if the institutions aren't supportive of that? And so I think that's something to be careful about.
True, sir, very true. Sir, our next question is, why do universities focus so much on entrepreneurship and not so much on small scale businesses? What is the reason?
Well, I think they do. It really depends on how they define it. So, you know, when you go to places, everybody defines entrepreneurship differently. So, you know, I can go here, there's certain places here, it's like it's all about venture creation, or it's all about high tech, high growth, you know, knock it out the park, super brilliant businesses. But then I can go to another center and it's all about rural entrepreneurship, or I can go to another university and it's all about social entrepreneurship, or you know, and we have many programs that are focused more on small businesses. So I think we use entrepreneurship as a political term, really, and there's lots of different things going on within it. I mean, not everybody is focused on venture creation. Not everybody is focused on the big, you know, knock it out of the park entrepreneurial successes. And so there are plenty of programs you can find that are focused on small businesses and helping their community with, you know, having students doing consultancy projects with their local small businesses and supporting that small business ecosystem rather than the big entrepreneurial stuff. So it really depends on, I guess it depends on the focus of the program. And you should, I mean, if you are engaged in trying to create an entrepreneurship program, you should look at your context. It's like, where am I? What is it that needs to happen here that's valuable? And then design an entrepreneurship program around the context you're in. What university am I at? What are we good at? If we're brilliant at medical technology, you know, medical research, then clearly focusing a little bit on medical technology and technology businesses is a good idea. If we're in a rural area and we're really strong at, I don't know, social sciences, then maybe focusing on your social entrepreneurs and on your social context and making sure that your community are doing well is more important. So I think it's really important, if you are running an entrepreneurship program, to look carefully at the context that you're in and then build the entrepreneurship program that is going to help that context. Because that's one thing I've learned, having gone multiple different countries and multiple different universities, is it's really important to look at the strengths of the university and look at the location before you even think about building anything. Don't just copy everybody. Well, what is it that we need here? before you build anything. And don't try and do everything. So that's the other thing. So there's a lot of things you can do in an entrepreneurship program. If you try to build everything, you're going to be very tired very quickly, and you're going to get gray hair and lose your hair like me.
Thank you so much, sir. That was an incredible session, sir. It really enlightened us. It really taught us a lot of things that we hadn't come across. And it was truly an incredible, beautiful intellectual session, sir. Thank you very much for your in-depth knowledge and expertise.
Thank
Once
you.
again,
I just want to say, thank you very much. I just want to thank everybody for being here, and appreciate the invitation. And I'm happy to share anything. I mean, obviously this is just one topic. I've got a whole bunch of other things that I write about. If anybody's interested in what I was originally going to talk about, which was ideation and theory, I do have a book chapter on that I've written I can share with you. It's also on ResearchGate. These, obviously you can get hold of these, but I'm happy to email papers. I'm currently writing about or researching doctoral education in entrepreneurship, specifically in the US context, but we have some issues in that space where we teach people to be researchers, but we never teach them to be educators, and yet we're trying to be innovative educators. So there are other topics there that I can share, and happy to share any articles or any information, and then you can find my work on ResearchGate as well.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you for that informative session.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much.
Sir.
Thank you, sir.
I would like to now hand over.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you. I would like to now hand over the platform to Professor Baishakhi.
Thank you, Dr. Abhishek. And as we have come to the end of today's sessions, I would like to extend my heartfelt gratitude to our esteemed speakers, Dr. Raj Singh, Mr. Juan Manuel Gonzalez, and Dr. Luke Pitave, for giving us enriching insights about the concept of entrepreneurship in current day business world, with trending techniques and practices to be adopted at various levels. I'm extremely thankful to our wonderful participants whose engagement and active participation fulfill the purpose of today's sessions. I would also like to convey special thanks to our summit advisors, Dr. Rogers M. Smith, Christopher H. Brown Distinguished Professor at University of Pennsylvania, USA, Dr. John Lipinski, Professor and Co-Director of the Excel Center for Entrepreneurial Excellence, Indiana University of Pennsylvania, USA, and Mr. Manoranjan Sharma, Chief Economics, Informerix Ratings India, who have been instrumental in making this summit meaningful. Thank you once again, everyone, for joining us. Hope to see you all tomorrow for the final day, the 9th day of International Entrepreneurship Summit, to begin with session by Dr. Paul D. Reynolds, alumnus, Stanford University, Honorary Professor of Entrepreneurship at Aston University, USA, who will be delivering his views on the topic Economic Development and Business Creation, a global overview of the entrepreneurship from 7 to 8 p.m., followed by international panel discussion from 8 to 9 p.m. with esteemed panelists, Manish Chaudhary, alumnus, IIT Delhi and IIM Bangalore, founder and director, peakmind.in, Purnatvam Foundation, and skillingindia.in, along with Zohar Hart, founder and CEO, One Creation Corporation, USA, Mariana Goody, CEO, Meraki Organization, Nicaragua, Thomas Trier Hansen, former Human Rights Manager, FIFA World Cup, Chief Advisor on Responsible Business Conduct, Rambol Management Consulting, Denmark, Mahesh Ramachandran, alumnus, London Business School, faculty, Indian School of Business, General Partner, Pontac, founder, Commonwealth Inclusive Growth Services Limited, India, and Dr. Alan Onskew Somers, alumnus, Imperial College of London, Executive Director, Global Entrepreneurship Monitor, Switzerland. Post which we have the session by Dr. David Acker, father of modern branding, delivering his views on the topic, owning game-changing subcategories, the role of branding. And finally, we will be culminating the event with the announcement of the Best Paper Awards and valedictory. Tomorrow, we are going to begin with the session at 7 p.m. sharp with our keynote speaker. I request you all to log in 15 minutes prior to the session. Hope to see you tomorrow at 6:45 p.m. IST. Have a great time. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Pitave. Thank you,
Thank you so
Dinesh.
much, sir.
Thank you, everybody.
Namaste, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.